CTV.
Now you know why perhaps the police and ambulance crews were rushing away, and anybody who was in the streets of New York City potentially could be buried in rubble right now.
Well, as we could see, I mean, now the entire picture changes, because just moments before the implosion of look at, here it is again, the same picture of the one of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center collapsing. But there was clearly mass fires on the ground surrounding the towers. So the debris itself, I mean, how far?
Depending on whether there was explosion on the plane will depend on the distance of the collateral damage.
I know this is a difficult question for you to answer. Who could be responsible for this?
The amount of planning and the way it's been used, I mean, it could be bin Laden. But I mean, as I said, I'm always loath to name names until people find out.
Give us some history, again, on bin Laden and where they came from, what their message is, what the World Trade Center bombing in 1993 was about. For the uninitiated out there who are witnessing this today, what is a terrorist group like bin Laden all about?
Well, bin Laden's aim is to fight the Great White Satan, which is the U.S. The problem with that is you can't attack the U.S. outside the U.S. primarily because of all the security procedures over the years going through the 80s and 90s with the terrorism. The only way you can effectively attack the U.S. is internally. And that's what they've been trying to do for about the last 10 years. Most of the terrorist attacks from these outside groups have been thwarted in their planning stages or when they've been moving their equipment in. Obviously now they've looked at a new way. We can't keep losing men and equipment, getting them into the U.S., so let's look at another way to do the attack.
So the infiltration, though, over the last, I guess, what, 10 years in a sense of these terrorist organizations slowly moving moles, or how do you refer to them, and living normal lives in a community until the day arrives? Give us some perspective on that.
Well, all these terrorist groups will do this. I mean, it happens here in Canada. I mean, we have terrorist groups operating and fundraising here in Canada, but they don't perpetrate any attacks in Canada, because if they did that...
Why are they here?
Well, they're here because of the close proximity to the U.S.
But how did they get here? I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, how did they get here?
We can debate our immigration system, you know, every which way but loose, but the bottom line is that people do get into this country, they live here illegally, they have alternative agendas, and they use their presence in Canada to generate interest, recruit, train, equip people for terrorist attacks in other parts of the world.
This isn't just specifically, you know, a reaction to the Bush administration. This is the kind of thing that doesn't matter who is in power in the United States. It's the country itself and what it stands for.
Yes, I mean, they've effectively closed down the business, the aircraft moving in and out and around the U.S. No one has ever done that before. So it's a major coup for whoever's done it.
It's really difficult to even comprehend that, as you say, shutting down the country.
They have shut down the Sears Tower in Chicago. It has been evacuated, fearing perhaps another strike. Obviously, suicide bombers doing this today. And you, Lisa, you talk about the Bush administration heavy into the defense system. And we can see some of the aircraft that are now trying to survey the scene. I mean, we thought before that there was some way you could put this out, and but how do you get mad? But how can you not get even?
Well, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, this is going to take weeks, if not months, to sort out. I mean, depending on how many people have been killed, they've got to go straight into their crisis management plans, which all these buildings will have. We've got to find out who's been killed, who's been injured, who's still alive.
And how this president handles this. This is a new president who has been criticized.
And of course, he wasted no time, though, in coming before he was out of school, as a matter of fact, this morning in South Florida when... obviously, when the news broke, the television cameras weren't far behind because they're everywhere when the U.S. president travels anywhere. So obviously, it did not take him long, given the intelligence he'd received, to call this a terrorist attack. He has ordered a full-scale investigation to, as he says, and I'm quoting him, hunt down the folks who committed this act. That seems far too simplistic, Alan, for what we're seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, what is a full-scale investigation? Give us some idea.
Well, what they're going to try and do, they'll have to identify the group Once they've identified the group, they've got to identify how they're going to attack that group. Now, the fact that bin Laden, if it is bin Laden, was given total autonomy in Afghanistan, this could change the whole dynamics of world power and militaristic goals. Because depending on what country these people operated from and actually come from, that could have a response from the Americans, which has not been unheard of before.
We remember
We have a word that the plane that crashed into the Trade Center was an American Airlines plane, obviously hijacked. How did he get on board? Give us an idea of the logistics behind the hijacking. How many potentially? How could they do this?
Well, there's many different ways of doing this. To hijack a plane is not difficult, as we know from past history. But once they're on the aircraft, they can just direct the pilot. And if they are suicide bombers, that means they're not frightened to die, and they'll shoot a few people just to prove that they're willing to go the extra
And
yard.
if they got on, that means there are security issues.
Yes.
And I want to give you, again, I have to just reiterate to everybody that this information is just slowly trickling in. But we've just received some information that seems to indicate that this implosion or the collapse of the South Tower here was from a separate bomb. That in fact the plane crashed and then a bomb may have brought down the South Tower.
Perhaps from beneath?
Yeah, how, explain
the security of those two entire is second to none now. If they've done that, I don't know how they would have got the bomb inside there, but one of the things they could have done
potentially
is put a bomb.
maybe after the disaster that went on top, with everybody rushing around in the chaos.
To move a bomb that size into the building, they wouldn't be able to do it.
But you know what, an airliner, I mean now there's a lot of eyewitnesses saying that the plane did appear to be an airliner. The implications of this are just so absolutely tragic. It's difficult to, really to comprehend the reality of it.
How do you comprehend today?
We've all got to sit back and take a deep breath and then figure out what we're going to do, and that's basically what everyone's going to have to do.
Okay, we're going to go right now to Rosemary Thompson, who is in our Washington bureau. Rosemary, we're looking at the live pictures of the billowing smoke over the Pentagon. Can you confirm word out of Washington that the whole city has been, essentially all of the government buildings evacuated? What can you tell us?
Yes, the White House has been evacuated. So has the State Department, the Capitol. Everything has been evacuated. All of the main government buildings. Of course, it's interesting. There was an Associated Press journalist that actually saw the plane crash into the Pentagon this morning and afterwards seeing billowing smoke. This all happened at the beginning of the morning as people were arriving at work. Washington is really in a state of shock right now, and of course to see the horrific images of the South Tower of the World Trade Exchange that have just collapsed. It's a frightening moment in America, and one wonders what the president will do to respond to all of this.
Especially, Rosemary, in lieu of the criticism that he has taken over the past, one wonders if he is a strong enough president right now.
Well, let's face it, over the last few months he's had a difficult time. Many have criticized him on his foreign policy. Also, people have said that he is well surrounded. He has people like Colin Powell around him, as well as Dick Cheney. These are people that he will turn to now in the next coming days to decide how he will respond to this. But this is the most horrific terrorist attack ever on American soil. For them to have been able to attack so many different targets within minutes of each other is really a frightening prospect.
Have you been out on the street yet, Rosemary? Are you able to even get out on the street?
Absolutely. I mean, people in Washington are able to move around, but one is that everyone's sort of looking at each other wondering what's next. I mean, as I came in on the metro this morning, there was almost an electricity on the metro. People had begun to hear, cell phones were going off on the metro. This was just coming in after the New York explosions. At that point, the Pentagon hadn't been hit, but people were rushing to the offices trying to figure out what to do. This is a city that is on high alert. It's interesting, you know, we always see a lot of security in the city. We're used to that type of thing, but this is an unprecedented situation, and undoubtedly people are just streaming into the street, and there's a lot of panic.
Give us the lay of the land there, Rosemary. For those people who don't know much about Washington, D.C., only through pictures and postcards, the picture is significantly altered this morning. Give us what you saw outside in and around the Pentagon.
Well, around the Pentagon, everything is actually very close, within very close geographic proximity. The Pentagon is not far. It's actually a few miles away from the Capitol. But if you look at the mall, which is where all of the big historic buildings are, none of those actually have been hit. It's within sort of a 2-mile radius from the White House down to the state capitol. Now, this is that area has been completely sealed off. Though that area also has very, very high security anyway. The White House is always on high alert. There are Secret Service people there all the time. But we saw people being evacuated from the White House earlier this morning, as well as the state capitol. And all of the major government buildings are also not far away from those areas, and all of those people have left their offices as well.
Now, Rosemary, we have no information yet on where the airplane was coming from that hit the Pentagon, but we can confirm that the Boston airplane that was hijacked was heading to Los Angeles. We also have, this is now images of the Twin Tower that collapsed, I believe, or is this the Pentagon? But anyway, the point is there are now reports that 3 people jumped from the World Trade Tower before the South Tower collapsed. Alan, do you want to climb in there? I mean, what is that? What made that?
It just shows you the sheer panic of what's going on. I mean, it's like an earthquake movie when a building that big and that complex just collapses onto the street. I mean, the damage that it'll do over a number of city blocks is phenomenal.
Looking at this scene is again, just to reiterate what's happened here this morning. One of the worst disasters in North America.
Well, in the world, I would say 3 major terrorist attacks in the United States, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, and the Pentagon. Word is that, well, we clearly saw the 2 airplanes hitting these towers in New York City. And Rosemary, between the timing between hitting the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, I should think they ratcheted up alerts in that city enormously.
How did that happen? How were they not able to shoot down a plane that was potentially near the Pentagon?
Well, let's think about it. This happened in very quick succession. Of course, New York City was the focus of it at the beginning because the 2 planes hit within 20 minutes of each other. Undoubtedly, everybody was looking to New York, but then thought, oh, what's next? Is Washington next? And very quickly after that, the Pentagon was hit with the plane. So certainly they could have been on high alert, but how could you possibly prepare for something like this? I think that your analyst was saying this is probably the most difficult thing for America. These types of individual events, how do you protect yourself all over the country from the air? I mean, this is a free and democratic country. People have the right to walk down the street, to go into public buildings, and this type of thing. So how can you possibly protect your country from these types of incidents?
When you heard of the Twin Towers and the bombing in New York City, did you even fathom that there might be a strike in Washington?
Well, I don't think at the beginning, no. I mean, everyone thought, okay, New York, but then, okay, you do think, okay, what about Washington? And the first thought is to the White House, because of course that is ultimately the symbol of power of the United States. And then to see the Pentagon. Interestingly enough, the reports that came out initially were of plumes of smoke. People thought that it had perhaps been an explosion. There had actually been a construction crew not far gone working there in the morning, so people thought, well, maybe it was just some type of strange accident. But then there was a report from an Associated Press reporter who was there at the scene, who saw the plane crash, saw the tail of the plane crashing into the Pentagon, and so that was the confirmation that indeed this was a similar type of attack to what had happened in New York City.
Reuters is also reporting that the plane in the New York crash was American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. And a word to Canadians traveling today, all flights from Pearson, specifically Pearson Airport, International Airport in Toronto, to the United States have been canceled. That's the latest we have, but I should imagine, Rod, that across the country, every single airport in the United States is shut down.
And Rosemary, back to you for a moment, because you know you.
No, here's an eyewitness. We might be able to hear.
No, I guess not. But there's a scene from. Now we do have some eyewitness clips.
Just shook. The building was shaking. Came down, glass started popping. People got hurt. Stuff went on top of them, and it was a big explosion. Everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, oh, this is not snow, this is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
Where exactly were you standing when this happened?
I was standing right in front of the World Trade Center.
So you were down the block here, and
right
you came
there in the
running this
middle.
way?
Right, yeah.
Did you get hurt at all?
No, not me.
Did you see anyone around you getting caught up in it?
Yeah, I was with the firemen. We got hurt. We all went inside to this dark. We were inside the building when everything happened. But we came out alive.
What's your name?
My name is Dr. Angel.
Were you able to assist anyone before this happened?
Yes, I did. I help a lot of patients. A lot of them.
Well, there are a lot more people that need help
They
now.
need help,
So
yeah.
if you're capable, maybe you should.
Yes, I'm gonna go back. I lost my ID, but I try to go back.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot for
All right.
talking to us.
Thanks.
We
People to go back, Alan. I
can you
mean,
talk
these
to us for a
people are
No.
saying go back to the scene where you were helping people.
No, you can't afford to do that because there could be other explosions afterwards. We don't know whether the fuel in the aircraft's
We
exploded
saw the
yet.
tower topple.
That's right.
Now here's another guy. We're just going to sort
And I
of
think
dip
this
in
has
and
been-
out if we can on.
All the traffic, all the people traffic was running up. And I'm looking up, I'm trying to call the station, trying to find where we are. And I look up and the tower just starts crumbling down. And everybody in the street just stops and started crying and bawling. And I'm standing next to a fireman, he said, yeah, they just bombed the Pentagon too. So that's basically where I saw. Then I came running down here. Traffic is not allowed past Warren Street. And you see what's here.
do you know which of the two towers?
The one without the main antenna on it. The second one that was hit.
That's the further south. This more southerly tower.
I think it's Tower 1, I'm not too sure the exact.
And
The one
you
without
actually
the-
saw it from the top
I
down
saw
collapsing.
it just come tumbling. It came sideways like this. It just collapsed in and on top of itself. It was amazing, but very upsetting to watch the whole thing come tumbling down. So we all thought it was another explosion, and we looked up. Instead of being two, there's one, and a big plume of smoke.
You were walking or driving?
I was running. I was stopped in the subway around 14th Street. Had to jump out of the middle between cars, run down the catwalk to get out of the subways because all the subways were stopped. And then I just started hoofing it down from West 4th Street. There was only traffic going northbound, nothing going, everything was jammed going back this way.
So just in case people are just tuning in, tell me again what you saw, what you heard.
Around 6th Avenue and Houston Street, I was trying to make phone calls. I looked up and I heard an explosion, and then I saw everybody in the street react first. People crying, people on the ground, everybody lying down. And then I looked up and I saw this huge plume of smoke and the tower just crumbling, and it just turned into a huge plume of smoke. And next thing you know, there's smoke in one tower, and that's what we're seeing right here.
Okay, I just want to
obviously
cut in here and tell you that we are now getting reports of an explosion on Capitol Hill. We have with us Alan Bell, a terrorist expert, and in Washington we have our Washington reporter Rosemary Thompson. Rosemary, can you give us any information on this latest report of some kind of attack on Capitol Hill?
Yes,
Here it is.
We're looking at pictures.
CNN is just reporting, and we can see pictures of the Capitol. There has apparently been an explosion at Capitol Hill. This, of course, is the area that I was telling. Oh, they're showing the Pentagon actually now, but apparently CNN has reporters on the ground on Capitol Hill where there has been some type of explosion. What a horrific day in Washington. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We've had some of the major buildings of the U.S. Capitol being bombed today in Washington, the Pentagon being one, of course, this morning, people seeing a plane crashing into the Pentagon. Now apparently the Capitol has been hit. One wonders what is next. It's really a horrific day here.
And that is not, just to confirm, that is not an airplane, or no one knows yet?
No one knows yet. This is just an initial report. We've heard of an explosion so far. CNN is reporting it.
And one of the planes, we can give you a little bit of new information on the plane that crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. An American Airlines flight from Boston to Los Angeles. This is from a spokesperson from the American Flight Attendants Union. This would have been a Boeing 767 capable of carrying 158 passengers. It was apparently hijacked from Boston. That would include, 2 pilots, 9 or 10 flight attendants. And again, a fourth, this now being the fourth attack in the United States on Capitol Hill.
Again, to Rosemary in a moment. Back to Alan Bell, the terrorist expert here in our studio. In broad daylight. This was no sneak attack.
Oh, no.
So, okay, a fourth attack. I mean, just
now they've got to be prepared for everything. I mean, they're evacuating most of the government buildings now. I mean, if they've done this, they're slowly, and this is an orchestrated attack on Washington. If you remember the orchestrated attack on the embassies, that was done across 4 countries.
Here is footage now
live
of the footage of the tower that collapsed and is collapsing in New York City. And again, from some of the witnesses on the street, these people very lucky to get away, I would think.
obviously the chaos on the streets of both cities now, and cities across, Rosemary, that country, I should imagine. I understand they've also evacuated the Sears Tower
In Chicago.
in Chicago.
That's right. I mean, every airport in this country has been shut down. Obviously, all of them, or everyone is concerned that another airplane could be taken as a hostage situation. So the airports are shut down. Most of the major government buildings are shut down. Anything that is of any symbolic importance in the United States has been shut down. Washington itself, of course, is the capital of all of those places, as well as New York, as we saw with the World Trade Exchange. But here in Washington, there are so many potential targets, the White House being one. We've seen the Capitol now with this apparent explosion, the Pentagon, the White House, the State Department. The list goes on and on and on. And in all of those places today, people have been told to leave work quickly, carefully. But of course, people are in a panic situation. This is a city that feels under siege.
We are looking at pictures, and again, we're going to get back to Rosemary Thompson, where there have been 2 strikes, Capitol Hill and also the Pentagon in Washington, and we are looking at pictures in New York City. That was videotape of, I believe that's the South Tower.
That's right.
That collapsed earlier, and the panic and chaos that ensued. Alan, you just flashed me over a note and said that the flames indicate that it was a bomb. And that was the plane, that was the second strike.
That was the second strike. I hadn't seen any of the video footage before, but when that explosion, the explosion I just saw on that video was definitely an explosion of a bomb-type material, because
A plane would not explode like that?
it would, but what I'm saying is it was not a normal explosion because of the flame, the red flame, the smoke, which indicates a clear explosion of some description.
Does that surprise you then? I mean, if there was some kind of explosive on an American Airlines plane, it means somebody got through security somewhere.
Yeah.
Is Boston, I mean, that's the largest Logan, isn't that one of the...
That's right.
But also a very busy airport. Very busy, one of the busiest airports, and it's a big airport, but it's very congested there.
But you have to remember, the bomb could be the aircraft.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's what you need with the fuel. You don't need to put a bomb on an aircraft.
Again, looking at pictures now from Washington, D.C.
And we have an eyewitness out of Washington who reports that the plane that hit the Pentagon was flying low and fast. Again, strategy, Alan, on this kind of attack. You know, for people just joining us, give us some perspective on this type of attack, jumping in, hijacking an airplane and slamming it literally into buildings full of thousands of people.
But one of the biggest problems that they have in Washington is, as I said, is the national airport in close proximity. I was in Washington a week ago, and there was planes flying all over the city. It heights anywhere from about 500 feet to about 1,000 feet. So it's very difficult controlling airspace now around Washington.
Now, there, you know, you just said, you talked about the fire you saw in the footage from New York. One of the eyewitnesses in Washington is now saying that there was a huge fireball, an orange fireball. He saw the tail of the large airline and it plowed right into the Pentagon. Again, does that indicate to you also that there was some kind of explosive on that plane?
No, that could have just been the fuel going. If all I know is the explosion I saw was definitely an explosion.
Okay, and
We have received word that the other tower in New York City may crumble. Again, we have one of the towers of the World Trade Center has crumbled to the streets in New York City after the second, I believe that was the second
that's right,
suicide bomber attack. I believe this is again the first tower that was attacked. It was higher up. I think the second strike, Alan, came a little bit lower.
Came in the middle.
So, and this apparently, obviously inside, could only imagine the hell on the streets in New York City.
First Canadian reaction, Canadian Transportation Minister David Collinette was in Montreal when he was reached by reporters, and obviously, I mean, as is everybody, Mr. Collinette saying he is shocked, stunned, and distraught. He wants to assure the Canadian public that all security in this country is being taken very seriously. If it was caused, he says, deliberately, which clearly it seems to have been by someone, it is horrible, he says. Other U.S. government institutions, including the Treasury and State Department, Rosemary, I understand, have also been evacuated the city after this second attack in Washington. The fourth overall has virtually shut that city down, and what's unfolding on the streets there? Okay, obviously Rosemary is not with us on the line.
Just something
There
else,
she is.
Lisa, and also Alan, one of the 2 planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked after takeoff from Boston, a U.S. official said. The second plane may have flown out of Newark, New Jersey. And that was from an official speaking on the condition of anonymity. At this point, I guess it doesn't really matter where they came from. I've got to deal with what's happened here and fend off any other attacks that may happen. What is going through the mind of President Bush right now as he tries to assemble the military and the Air Force?
Well, the first priority of everyone in the U.S. is try to prevent other attacks if there's other attacks in the pipeline. Whether this is the last attack, we don't know yet, so we've got to be prepared for other attacks.
Okay, we want to go now to Blake in Jerusalem Radio. Blake, you're with us on the line. Give us some reaction if you can. Blake Lambert from Jerusalem Radio, if you can give us immediate reaction from where you are.
Reaction right now from the Israeli government. One thing we have heard, and we've heard equal denial claims, is that the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine is allegedly in a claim to Abu Dhabi Television, which is based in the United Arab Emirates, has claimed responsibility for one of the attacks. Now, just to give people an idea what the DFLP is, it's a rejectionist group that used to be part of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. These two groups are part of the PLO. They rejected the Oslo process. The DFLP, however, has never carried out, to my knowledge, to what I have seen, to what I have read, carried out such an attack on such a scale. So again, as I've mentioned, there has been a claim of responsibility and a counterclaim, but I can say people in Israel are extremely, extremely fascinated, worried, and transfixed by this story because once people heard the name DFLP, it suddenly alerted everybody that this may be a story that is related to the ongoing conflict in the region.
Yeah, and of course the history with the World Trade Center, the February 26th bombing in 1993, an attack that was meant to force the United States to curb its support for Israel and to stay out of the Middle East. Instead, it resulted in heightening of security at public buildings across the country and increased the attention to the threat of terrorism.
And if you think maybe, Blake, I don't know, you tell me, but you know, the United States having just pulled out of the World Conference on Racism this past weekend in Durban, any perspective on that?
Let me put it to you this way, for people can understand the data that I have. I have seen polls, at least 3 over the last year or two from the Jerusalem Media and Communications Center, which is based in East Jerusalem. They asked their respondents a question: how many feel that the U.S. is biased in favor of Israel? The response is about 95%. People who know this region do feel the Palestinians are biased in favor of Israel. Now, that's a huge leap of logic to go from point X or from point A to where we're at now. Again, so I don't think we can absolutely make that connection. But yes, there has been a traditional feeling that from Palestinians that the U.S. is completely in Israel's pocket.
Blake, let's stay on the line, please, with us as we try to cover this the best we can. Back to Rosemary Thompson in Washington. Apparently, Rosemary, as we take a look more at what's going on at the Trade Center, there is extensive damage, apparently.
And a car bomb, I've just learned at the State Department.
That's right. We've just heard. That's right. We just have a report of a car bomb outside the State Department in Washington. That's just a few blocks away from our offices here at CTV News. This would be the third attack in Washington today. We have the Pentagon early this morning, then the Capitol, and now the State Department. 3 targeted already in Washington. It's just an initial report. We don't have a lot of detail yet, but this has just happened.
And also, I want to just jump in here and say that all U.S. flights have been diverted to Canada. That's the latest word we're receiving. But Rosemary, you know, we've just been listening to Blake Lambert at Jerusalem Radio, just sort of citing in Arab East Jerusalem, 95 or 90% of the people in Arab East Jerusalem believe that the United States does show favoritism toward Israel. You know, this has been a really contentious 2 weeks for the U.S. in the role and in pulling out of that conference in Durban.
Well, that's right. I mean, the United States didn't want to take a role of seeing Israel being the one country that was going to be singled out in Durban as being a racist country. So the United States decided even before the conference was to take place that it didn't want to be part of it.
Rosemary, we're looking at live pictures right now. The second tower has just toppled to the ground at the that is the second of the 2 twin towers at the World Trade Center in New York City.
One of the greatest land sites in North America, one of the symbols of the United States.
certainly
is no longer.
one of the targets in 1993 of the bombing at the World Trade Center was because of its symbolism, because it is the example of American capitalism. Alan, our
you're shaking your
terrorism
head
expert here in the studio, and Rosemary Thompson in Washington. I mean, I think we're all just sitting here in a
Shocked.
total state of
It's
shock.
extraordinary. It's just an extraordinary moment. I mean, who could have imagined this? This is the capital. This is the symbol of America's financial might and know-how in the world, and it's gone now. And the people, I just can't imagine those poor people. And to think of the people that were in the planes that crashed into this building, one would imagine the terror of these poor people.
The innocent people who are there, who have absolutely no, some of them who wouldn't even know what a terrorist group is, or would know certainly about what happened at the World Trade Center years ago.
Alan?
We're going to work in the morning, we're showing up, and a cataclysmic event in the United
Busiest
States.
time, 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I mean, in New York City, we can sure imagine that with the markets opening. Here's a replay of the visuals. You know, those people would be crowding in there at 8 a.m. So we know this is like maximum time to target.
There's over 20,000 people working in those towers.
The worst day in the history of the United States.
Well, you know, Alan, I want you to give me some background here on, I mean, I can't even think of another terrorist attack anywhere in history that, and am I wrong on that?
This will go down in the annals. As far as the U.S. was concerned, obviously the biggest one was Oklahoma. That's now been well surpassed
Now let's talk about the difference between Oklahoma and really, you know, you bring up a really interesting point, because in the very early hours after the Murray building in Oklahoma City was bombed, it was immediately believed that it was foreign infiltrators, and certainly Timothy McVeigh has just been put to death as a result of that bombing. Put this in perspective, how dangerous it is really now to assume that it is outside influence.
Well, we can't assume anything, and I was one of the very few people after the Oklahoma bombing to say, let's not point the finger in the wrong direction this particular time, because if you remember, a lot of the Muslim groups were being attacked because they believed that they were responsible for it. So there's going to be a lot of homework to be done. There's going to be a lot of other terrorist groups who are going to turn around and say, we did it.
And every minute there was a news report saying that some terrorists came forward to take credit for Waco, and again, more footage.
Both center towers of the New York City, in the heart of Manhattan, the World Trade Center. You're looking at the latest pictures out of New York, the collapse of both towers. There's been now the third attack in Washington, a car bomb in front of the State Department. First it was the Pentagon, then it was Capitol Hill. That brings the total to 5. This is the replay of that second tower
And
collapse.
the first 3 attacks being airplanes, suicide bombers. The fourth attack I don't think we're sure about yet, but it's obvious now that if this group that has done this has now mounted some sort of ground assault.
That's right.
Well, this is it. How massive an organization and how much planning. If you take us back to, and I know I spoke to you so many times during the fear leading up to 2000 that terrorist attacks were going to unfold across the United States. Is this what we were talking about then?
I think we anticipated these types of attacks at the millennium, the end of the millennium. And it didn't transpire. Whether they thought, well, everyone's prepared now for those attacks, let's just carry on planning. But getting back to the planning of these types of operations, this would have taken years to plan. A long, long time to plan. They'd have to get the planes right, the right people in the right positions, the car bombs in the right locations.
I look again towards Manhattan.
This is shocking. This is the debris now. We're looking at the fallout from the collapse of this 110-2. I'm not positive that both towers were 110 stories, but 20,000 people, you say, Alan, working in these two buildings?
Massive
50,000
casualties.
we're hearing.
You would think. So the millennium potential doesn't happen, and you would think. Now, do you think that the United States let its guard down?
No, I don't think they'll let its guards down. I mean, they're aware of the fact now that terrorist attacks can be perpetrated on their soil. Until the first World Trade Center attack, they didn't think that was possible because of their security might, their intelligence information, etc.
All flights out of Ottawa we've just received word, have also been canceled. So clearly the Canadian government is taking enormous precautionary measures as well, just in case, as we all know, we have been called in the past, Alan, and you've discussed this many times, a route, a conduit.
And once again, I'll look at the North Tower. The Canadian military has stepped up security at installations following the attacks. Military police have replaced commissionaires at the gates of the Halifax Dockyard and nearby Shearwater Air Base. Precautionary measures, apparently.
Can we go help, Alan? Like, what do we have to offer, honestly?
No, we can't help this. I mean, the Americans have the infrastructure in place to be able to get some type of order out of this chaos. And they won't require help from outside at this particular moment in time.
And what happens, like this kind of a massive attack on the United States, then what happens with all the NATO partners? Do we all have to get involved in some, give me some...
You are now looking at, there's going to be major policy changes around the world now. I mean, this is devastating, and once everyone finds out how many people have actually been killed and mutilated and injured, when we see the final cost, whenever that happens to be over the coming weeks, then a decision will be made in such a position whereby there's going to be dramatic responses to this.
On the line, Peter Craig is the general manager at Lester B. Pearson International Airport in Toronto. Hi, Peter.
Hello.
What is happening at the airport?
Well, obviously we're in irregular operations here at the airport now. All flights to and from the U.S. have been suspended until further notice. And we're just trying to keep things as smooth as possible here at the airport.
Peter, were the flights that were, moments or even half an hour away from various American airports, were they rerouted to this country? And if so, what is the status of the Pearson Airport?
I can't speak fully to that issue. You have to talk to the air traffic controllers in Nav Canada. I understand they are currently working on that issue at this point. From the airport standpoint, we are more than willing and able to accept flights should they be redirected here.
Peter, we again received word that the flights from the United States and to the United States, or to the United States, have been canceled. Is that wide sweeping across Canada?
I understand it is. I can't speak for every airport across the country, but I do understand that's the way it is. It's certainly the way it is at Pearson Airport.
Have you wandered through the airport? What is the general sentiment there, if you can imagine what's unfolding in the United States?
Well, obviously, I think people are shocked by what has happened, and they're wondering what the impact here is at the airport. So we're trying our best to inform passengers here at the airport what's going on. The other thing I'd like to say to passengers, people who have flights today from Pearson Airport, scheduled flights, likely those flights aren't going to happen, especially in North America. And I think you could probably call the airlines to confirm that, but it is irregular operations today, and I would suspect the entire schedule will be disrupted.
Peter, back to you just in a second. Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago, we have received word, that he and his fellow followers would carry out an unprecedented attack on U.S. interests for its support of Israel. It is nothing from the United States to report, but we have a quote that says it is most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago he would attack American interests again, an unprecedented attack, a very big one. We have had 5 huge attacks today, the 2 biggest on the World Trade Center.
Alan, I want you to comment on that. And also, I remember before the G8 summit in Genoa, the security was massive, and one of the reasons for increased security around George W. Bush was because at that point Osama bin Laden had, if you recall, even released video of his troops training for the ground and air assault, is how they described it, that was going to unfold there, because the United States was the target, but it was in that location. That didn't happen, and everybody said, oh, there it is again, Osama bin Laden just sort of inciting fear.
Well, if Bin Laden made that statement 3 weeks ago, there's no way could this have been planned in 3 weeks. It's absolutely impossible to plan this type of attack in 3 weeks. So whether it's Bin Laden who's doing this, or whether it's another group, we don't know yet.
And why would you even release? I mean, obviously, like we said before, it's too soon to really say. Even the reports out of the DFLP Palestinian organization have since been denied. So it's tough to really associate anybody with this, this point.
I think we should maybe go out to Blake Lambert.
Is Blake still with us?
Is Blake still with us? Blake, are you there?
Trying to find out.
I
think we're going to try it. Again, this quote from Abdel Bari Atwan, the editor of the London-based Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper, is the man who has said this, that about the Islamic fundamentalists led by bin Laden. And you would wonder now, with this gets out, what...
Do you put credence in it?
Do you have credence if they said, I mean, who would know? Would they have a threat in Washington, for instance, if they warned 3 weeks ago, who would they warn? Who would they talk to?
Well, most of these warnings are just, it's rhetoric. The majority of it rhetoric, as it is in Northern Ireland.
Would they get warnings daily?
They get warnings on a regular basis. As they'll have 5 or 6 groups who will claim responsibility for this. Bin Laden has got the infrastructure, the money, and the ability to put something like this together. There's no doubt about that. As for other minor terrorist, Islamic terrorist groups, they don't have the reach that Bin Laden has.
Okay, so 3 weeks. You say 3 weeks. It would be impossible to organize this kind of orchestrated attack on the United States. Any perspective then on how long something like this would be?
Well, what you have to do, you've got to bring all the people to a central location. You've then got to bring the explosives they're going to use on the attack. You've then got to look at flight paths, which airports you're going to hijack, because if you hijack an aeroplane too far away from Washington or New York, the warning is going to go out and the military could take affirmative action. That's never happened, and whether it will, I don't know.
So you would think any airstrikes that would happen, hopefully we have not seen another airstrike, but potentially throughout the United States you may see potential bombings.
You may see potential bombings, but I think the focus is the heart of the U.S., which is
population base, the capital.
Part of the Pentagon now has collapsed. We're bringing you these pictures as quickly as we can, and some of them are live, some of them are replays of the shocking video, the events as they unfolded since 9 a.m. this morning. So that's almost 2 hours ago that the first airplane crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
And unbelievably, we have received word that there has been another plane crash in Pittsburgh. That may be unrelated, so we can't be we must be speculative there. Peter Gregg, are you still with us? Peter?
But it does indicate the chaos, really, if you think about it. All right, all of the airplanes, as you were saying, that was radar over the United States as these attacks were starting to unfold. The chaos in air traffic controllers, if this Pittsburgh accident, we don't know yet if it is related, but would you agree, Alan, that the chaos that must be unfolding in air traffic centers across that country?
Well, terrorists themselves will give you a target. They'll explode a bomb to get all the emergency services to it to respond, and then they'll have another bomb somewhere else. And I think that's what's happened here. They've flown a plane into the Pentagon. At the same time, everyone's looking at the Pentagon, and then what they're doing, they're detonating other bombs around the city and cars.
And the diversion technique.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask Peter Gregg, who was at the airport, obviously, about security for people going in and out in Canada. And as you mentioned, we may not have to worry in Canada, but going in and out of, I mean, they've shut down airports throughout the United States. We look at the air strikes themselves. How is it possible, again, for people joining us, that this happened this morning, the hijackings? How could terrorists get into the airports?
Well, in this airport, they would have walked through this. They would have done a rehearsal. They'd have got the same aircraft at the same time, going to the same location to see what happened.
Their supposed vision. Certainly a rehearsal would be nothing to that. The arrest would be nothing.
Also, word, Alan, this may, I'm sure, not surprise you. All Canadian borders have also been closed. So give us some background, if you can, on some of the conversations. And I know there were many and conferences indeed to discuss exactly this cross-border terrorism.
Well, one of the problems they're going to have now is there's obviously ground force terrorists involved as well if they planted these car bombs or in other locations. So those people have got to now escape. and probably the best way for them to escape is probably maybe leave the US. They can't leave the US by air, so what the Americans are doing now, the Americans are probably acting. The Canadian government is closed down the border, so anyone who doesn't get out while they conduct their investigation.
And there's been a lot of talk about supposed terrorists who are in Canada. What does the RCMP do now? Do they get to these people now and make sure that nothing is happening?
Well, what they could do, they could start picking up people they've got under surveillance, they suspect various different activities.
That city and Alan Pryor, you are with us, I understand, our Washington bureau chief. Give us up, what's the latest information out of Washington?
It's a very eerie scene on the streets right now, Lisa. People are just frantically, I wouldn't call it panic, but frantically trying to get out of the city any way they can. This obviously is unprecedented. There have been reports of explosions at the State Department and on the Capitol, and of course what we believe was a passenger plane crashed into the Pentagon. An entire wing off the Pentagon, from what we can tell, has collapsed in on itself. Washington as well as New York obviously under attack. People doing whatever they can simply to get out of the city. President Bush now, we are told, is on his way back from Florida, where he was on a trip. He's on Air Force One and heading to the White House. And we and every other reporter in the city right now trying to find out where the major players are located right now, including the Vice President. As you can imagine, it is nothing short of chaos. And I should add, a very bizarre and frightening scene. As you know, the airspace right across the United States has been closed down to commercial air traffic, but we have seen military aircraft patrolling the skies over Washington.
Alan, and what we may have is some massive hijackings going on. Unconfirmed reports of a 747 crash in Pittsburgh. Again, unconfirmed reports of potentially, maybe to get a larger center, the plane crash potentially may have been even shot down. We're not sure. But also, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien has said he is horrified by the attacks in the United States, calling the terrorists cowardly and depraved. What's it like outside right now in Washington?
Well, as I said, people are doing whatever they can to get out of the city. All federal government buildings have been closed and evacuated. It's a strange scene. People just frantically trying to find any way out of the city that they can.
Alan, was there any early warning, any rumblings on the streets anywhere over the last few days? We've just had this information that Osama bin Laden 3 weeks ago warned that he and his followers were going to carry out an unprecedented attack on the United States. And also, we've just received word from Palestinian President Yasser Arafat condemning the aircraft attacks. He sends his condolences to the people and to the president, completely condemning the serious operation. Completely shocked, he says he is. But you give me some perspective, if you can, from Washington on the warnings that Osama bin Laden allegedly put out 3 weeks ago.
Well, obviously, the CIA and other intelligence agencies in the city are receiving and evaluating threats against the United States almost on a constant basis. And as you say, Osama bin Laden's name often pops up at the center of them. Now, how many of these threats are taken seriously, we don't know. Obviously, all were investigated, but clearly this comes as a surprise. Nobody in the U.S. expecting an attack of anything resembling this magnitude.
Thank you, Alan Fryer in Washington. Alan Bell in our studio. If this is confirmed that a plane has gone down in Pittsburgh, again, we cannot confirm that yet. Air traffic controllers, how much training do they have right now? I mean, obviously has been shut down, but how much training would they have in situations like this that happened around 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern? Everything wasn't shut down at that point. How much training would they have when they know that there may be planes that are doing things that aren't
Well, first of all, they would identify which planes have been hijacked, because that can be done by the pilots. The pilots can send out a signal beacon when a plane is hijacked, so they would know instantly which planes have been hijacked.
Now, I just want to give you, as I said, we're just going to give you the latest information as we receive it. We've just heard that another hijacked plane is being monitored as expected to head toward Washington. So that is happening right now. Like, I can't believe we're actually would be getting that. Exactly. What do you do if you have a word from an air traffic controller that a plane's been hijacked?
That's going to be the President of the United States decision, whether he shoots the plane down.
Especially
Look at live coverage we're looking at. Sorry, this is, the World Trade Center.
Especially when you have civilians, when you have people down below, you shoot down a plane, you can again have massive casualties. If this is, do you take the hit? I mean, it sounds trite, but you take the hit at what might be a U.S. building.
No, I think they're going to take the aircraft out in a less take it out over the ocean or wherever the case may be, because the pilots and they know if they've got a guy behind them with a weapon who's telling them to fly into the city to crush it. Most pilots will probably take their chances to do what they can do.
But you think of Washington, the size and weight of Washington, civilians to each other, military now, that alert of what's unfolding. How easy would it be now to continue penetrate?
It would be very difficult to penetrate Washington airspace now, because I should imagine they've now got a cap, the combat air patrol up there of U.S. jets. But it's only going to be the President of the United States who's going to authorize them taking out a U.S. airline.
I understand Colin Powell he is in Colombia, will also be heading back to Washington as quickly as possible.
We can also tell you that New Brunswick Premier Bernard Lord apparently in New York City today on a trade mission. Certainly hope that he is all right. We certainly hope that...
well, I mean, our hopes and prayers to everybody. This is just such a truly shocking and tragic event across the United States.
You cannot even hope to put it in words. You can think about Swiss Air. You can think of all the tragedies. Many of us didn't live through a world war or weren't here when the world wars were going on. We've always said that, thank goodness we've never gone through something like that. Our ancestors, our forefathers have, and they're haunted by the wars. And we've had tragedies, massive disasters, Mother Nature disasters, but I cannot ever think of something like this.
And Alan, I want to bring Alan Fryer in Washington, because I mean it's got to be pretty frightening, I should think, and pretty surreal to be in Washington right now, to be watching this unfold steps from your bureau.
Well, surreal is a good word to describe that, Lisa. And, the question that's going through my mind right now is the planning that obviously went into this terrorist attack. It looks, if all these reports are confirmed, that 5 passenger jets have been hijacked almost simultaneously. 2 that went into the World Trade Center, another that crashed into the Pentagon. We're getting reports, as you say, of a 747 crashing in Pennsylvania, perhaps near Pittsburgh, and reports unconfirmed so far that military jets are monitoring a 5th passenger jet, perhaps hijacked somewhere near Washington. So this is just unprecedented and incredible. The words don't exist really to describe it.
Yeah, Alan, let's just go back to the belt for a minute. Might those jets that have been hijacked been backups for those original terrorists and now are fleeing?
It could be, it is a possibility, but if there are suicide bombers on board, they'll just go down into an American city and take out whatever they can as part of the cause. Suicide bombers are not going to flee from their task.
So this kind of coordinated terrorist attack, I understand Alan Fryer, and you can just jump in, Alan, actually, because what you're probably receiving late new information all the time also, but that there's just mass agents throughout Washington patrolling with automatic weapons, trying, I guess, to avert any future disasters, car bombs, this sort of thing.
Right, absolutely. And as people flee the city, as they have been doing all morning, I think what we're going to see within short order is Washington look very much like a militarized armed camp as security forces and every available emergency vehicle move in. Obviously, the priority is to help the injured, a massive attack at the Pentagon, as you know, but then to secure the Capitol, and gosh, who knows how long it's going to remain that way.
Alan, to secure the Capitol, but also the country, when you think of the FAA ordering an entire nationwide air traffic system shutdown, I mean, as Alan Bell, our terrorist expert, said, they certainly have managed to shut the United States down.
Absolutely, and of course the government through the FAA probably had no choice until they get a handle on this situation, figure out just how widespread this terrorist attack was, exactly who was involved and what the targets were. Obviously, this is the only precaution that they could take given the situation, just to shut everything down and put a damper, especially over the nation's capital here in Washington, which is what's going on now.
All 5 stories of the West Wing of the Pentagon have collapsed. We can tell you that. We can also now confirm that a 767 jet has crashed near Pittsburgh, 80 miles southeast in Jennerstown. Again, it was speculative before that this was involved, but I don't think this is speculation anymore, Alan Bell.
No, there's a pretty good chance. I mean, you're not going to have this many aircraft going down in one day unless it's a planned event.
The impact of the Alan Fryer, you know, the Pentagon, the seat of military in the United States, the government of the superpower of the world. What is the big term impact here? Oh, apparently we have Yasser Arafat. We're going to take you live to
the American people for this time. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Just as shocked as the rest of the world. I'm sure we're going to hear from world leaders. You know, we've heard from Jean Chrétien, who has also condemned these senseless terrorist acts. Again, Alan Fryer, before the Palestinian chairman Arafat stepped up to the microphone, I was asking for the impact on shutting down the government in that country.
Well, it's huge, and there are so many questions, Lisa, that haven't been answered. Obviously, right off the bat, the priority has to go to the victims of these terrorist acts. It's hard to say, but we may be talking in the thousands, perhaps even the tens of thousands of lives lost. Obviously, a lot of questions, too, that a terrorist attack, a planned and coordinated terrorist attack on the United States of this magnitude obviously signals a huge security lapse, a lapse in intelligence, and obviously in the days, weeks, and months to come, a lot of questions are going to be asked about U.S. intelligence and what information they had and didn't have.
That's just, I think that is, and Alan Bell, certainly you can talk to this as well, the lapse, as Alan Fryer says, in intelligence.
Yeah, the lapse in intelligence, there will be some lapse of intelligence, but one of the biggest problems you've got here is you don't know how long this incident has been in the making. This could have been a fallout from the 2000 Millennium attacks. Maybe they planned this on the night. The security was too intense. They decided to backburner it.
We're going to
Let's go back to New York City once again.
Start evacuating?
Yeah, because as soon as he got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
Were there other people that were hurt, were lying
there?
There
was a lot of people hurt. They were lying on the floors, coming down the stairs. A lot of people had asthma attacks while they were coming down. It was bad. It hit in one World Trade Center, it hit somewhere on the 67th floor. I was on the 56th.
And was it chaos trying to come down the steps?
Yes.
What was it like? Describe it.
Everybody was on top of each other trying to come down, and then somebody finally calmed the crowd down to get them to come down the stairs in an orderly fashion and get them out of the building.
And what just happened now?
The building just came down. One of them, I don't know which one came down. I don't know if it was one or two.
What did you start doing when that happened?
Running. Like everybody else, but trying to calm the people down while they were running, because I told them this is how people get hurt. Is when they start trying to, get out of the way, and it's just crazy. I just thank God I made it down from 56.
What's your name?
My name is Debbie.
Debbie, your last name?
Troy.
Troy, and where do you work?
I work at CMP Press.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie.
Once again, that's the scene in New York City. If you're just joining us,
you can see that, you know, we're just showing you tape as soon as we can get it, so forgive us if the tape rewinds, but we want to give you perspective also that, you know, this is not just about the United States.
This is also really Alan Bell, terrorism expert, who joins us. And again, for the people joining us, there have been 4 plane crashes already, suicide bombers, 2 into the World Trade Center, which has been absolutely demolished, has crumbled to the city streets, 1 in the Pentagon, and they have lost the West Wing and 5 floors of the Pentagon, and also 1 in Pittsburgh. And hopefully we don't have any more, but this is obviously massive hijacking, massive strikes against the United States. Do we have to worry about other places in the world, and do we have to worry in Canada?
I think you'll see all the U.S. embassies around the world, all the U.S. consulates will instantly start a red alert on all of them, probably evacuate all of them, and basically close them down.
Already the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires has been evacuated after apparent attacks after the attacks in New York and Washington, so we're probably seeing that at U.S. embassies
around the world.
The irony of ironies, you were teaching a class this morning on terrorism.
Yes.
And now the worst possible terroristic attack in the history of our world
What were you, give us some, if you can, some of your insight on what the people in that class would have been learning, and if there's really any way to learn enough to avoid this.
Well, I was basically talking about the origins of terrorism, and my pager started going off and went off for an hour for different people trying to get hold of me to comment. So I told them I had to stand them down for a couple of hours while I came and was interviewed.
The United States government has blamed the Afghani government for harboring Osama bin Laden, who may or may not be responsible for the events that have happened here in the country today, and therefore the Taliban...
All right, CNN's Aaron Brown providing some perspective. It was a little difficult to hear what the gentleman was saying because that was transmitted by new technology, a video phone that actually transmits pictures. But when he was asked directly whether or not Osama bin Laden had been responsible, he said up to now no one has claimed responsibility. We should, just for proper context here, say that that gentleman there was a member of the Taliban Foreign Affairs Ministry. The Taliban is the actual de facto government in Afghanistan and is not associated, it says, with Osama bin Laden or terrorist activities. So we have not heard precisely from Osama bin Laden or the people who he is with, but we have heard from some of the Taliban's rulers, as you heard there, that they didn't believe that he had the sophistication to carry out such an enormous attack and coordinated attack. We are going to switch to Toronto now. Now, as we have heard throughout the morning, there have been some copycat things going on in this country. Bomb threats phoned in on Parliament Hill. Graham Richardson is standing by now in Toronto with news of what's happening in Toronto. Graham?
Kevin, it is just chaos down here right now. If you can see behind me, University Avenue, it's just, 1 o'clock here in Toronto, and it looks like about 6 o'clock. What we know is we don't think that this is a safety issue. What we know is that a lot of people, as a courtesy, have been allowed to go home. Tens of thousands of people have emptied out into the streets of Toronto, downtown Toronto. Union Station in the heart of the city, the main commuter area, is just chaos. They've added extra buses to essentially get people out of the core of the city. The TTC, the Toronto Transit Commission, the public transit in the city, has added rush hour service simply to get people out of the core. Now, we can tell you that near the American consulate today, a building was evacuated because they said they were close to the American consulate and people were very, very nervous. At the consulate itself today, there were lots of people going to get work visas, do things that they normally do. And this was even after the plane attack. People were being allowed, the attack on the trade towers, people were being allowed into the American consulate. As the news got worse and worse, people started to stream out, and they essentially closed for the day, told people to come back the next day. Some Canadians we talked to down there were very, very upset about the fact that they may be moving to the United States, and very, very fearful, obviously, as so many other people around the world are today.
Now, Graham, you're standing at the head of University Avenue there, and farther down, that's the financial heart of Toronto. Now, I know that in many places in Toronto, many of the people on Bay Street, for instance, would have been in constant contact with colleagues on Wall Street in the U.S. Have we had any sense of just how hard a day this is for people who work in the trading houses of Toronto?
I think it's very difficult, Kevin. I talked to one trader who was just in shock after they shut down the TSE. And, if nothing else, over the last 15 years, there's been a closer connection between those two communities, so a lot of travel between those two communities, and a lot of people walking down through the towers, actually, sort of looking up at the TD Tower, looking up at various other towers, saying, just like that, reduced to rubble. So there's still a sense of shock. The other thing interesting that we found was we happened to bump into about 150 transit workers. There were bus drivers who happened to be here from all over the United States on a convention. I talked to one fellow who said he knew 2 security guards who were at the Trade Center, and he's sure they were dead, and he was crying, and they were trying to continue on their normal day here in Toronto, and they were going on a harbor cruise, but obviously the city is essentially shut down. As you can see, if you can just quickly push in there, it took us about 45 minutes to get from downtown here to Queen's Park, which is usually about a 10-minute drive. So it's just been chaos down here, as it is in other cities across North America, I would assume.
All right, thanks, Graham. You're absolutely right. Graham Richardson reporting live from the steps of the Ontario legislature this morning of what's going on in Toronto. The stock market, of course, in Toronto, the TSE is closed for the day, as is the Dow, naturally, in New York City. There have been some reports from the Federal Reserve in the United States that they are prepared to release more money. Here's some new pictures, pictures we have not seen at the top of the World Trade Center, where many of the traders that Graham was talking about had their offices. We do not know at this hour whether or not they were able to evacuate. We know that you know, at a certain level, above 2/3 of the way up, they were not able to evacuate and may have, in fact, been waiting for rescue on the top of that building. Just a tragedy of unbelievable size, magnitude, and horror. Let's go to Wilf Dinnick, because he is at the border between Canada and the United States, which, for all intents and purposes, has been clamped down today. Wilf, tell me what the latest is.
We're still not hearing anything from the American side. Only what we can do is just gauge by what's actually going on, and that is that the traffic is still moving, albeit slowly. They're saying it's about an hour-and-a-half wait, and that's from the Canadian side. And the reason for that hour-and-a-half wait is because they're doing extensive searches of all the cars that are coming into the United States, but you can still get through. So essentially what's happening here is it's the equivalent to rush hour in the middle of the day. Now, if you were going to New York City or going to Buffalo from Toronto, this is one of the major ways you can go. And what the Canadian border people are saying is that this is a pretty good indication of probably what's happening at border patrols right across the country, that they don't have a firm and fast policy whether they're going to shut them down. But what they're looking at now is just making sure that they go extensive searches and search through every car and interview every person. And behind us, on several occasions, we've seen unmarked police cars with their sirens going, border patrol, both provincial police and state police, whipping around to different cars from time to time. So that's where we are right now.
Normally, Wilf, on a busy day, there's a fair bit of traffic that goes across Erie there. Has anybody there been able to compare it? I mean, are Canadians actually staying away because they've heard what's happened?
Well, we've been watching, and there's actually been nobody been turning away. In fact, when we were coming down to the border, we were beside a big tour bus from Ontario, and they pulled over, and we watched, you know, the police and the border people get on, and they were on there for about 45 minutes. They got off, and then they left. So that's probably a pretty good indication of what's going on. It's just a lot longer. Most times, as I've crossed this border many times, you know, they only search the odd car, or they only get on the odd bus. But this one, they seem to be doing absolutely every car and every bus and every truck. And if you can see over the bridge, in fact, there is a lineup of cars. And as I said, the difference may be that it's just 1 in the afternoon. You know, it's just midday here in Toronto, but back there, or at least what it's like is rush hour. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of difference.
All right, thanks very much. Wilf Dinnick reporting live from Fort Erie, Ontario, and as Wilf said, it is in fact very similar at border crossing across this country at this hour, particularly in the east, along the Quebec, Vermont, and New York borders, along the New York and Ontario border, as you saw there, and also in the west as well. Even ferry traffic between Seattle and Victoria and Vancouver has been stopped. So obviously the reason is if there are still people in the United States responsible for this atrocity, American authorities are hoping to seal the country, not only on the Canadian border, but also on the Mexican border as well, to prevent them from escaping. Although from the magnitude and the horror of what we've seen here, it would appear that many of the attacks were in fact suicide bombings. Let's return to CNN to see what they have to report at this hour.
Did it. Correct. All the evidence points to a connection between Osama bin Laden and Taliban leaders, and an attempt on the Taliban's part to, as the New York Times put it, 2 days before this attack, call it as a ploy. And that is a quote from the New York Times before this happened. So I just want to underscore again, we are going to need the support of all our allies in Europe, the Russians, the Chinese, and any other country that might have in the past flirted with playing both sides of the street. Nothing like this has happened in American history. The full dimensions of it are still not clear to anyone, but I think we all can imagine it's going to be heart-wrenching in its dimensions as it becomes fully apparent, and we're not going to be able to leave countries playing two sides here. And I'm sure my friend Bob Gates would not disagree with that.
Let me, Mr. Gates, I want to come back to you. Mr. Holbrook, stay with us for a minute. I believe now we have the president. This is the president on tape a few moments ago. Obviously we're having a technical problem. Let me just tell you what, again, the president said in what has been his second statement. His first statement came after the first attacks here in New York. Short time ago, the president said, we have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. He added, we make no mistake, said the president, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible. I think we're going to try and hear the president again. Here we go. Yeah. This is coming to us from the broadcast pool. It's traveling with the president. Obviously, it's a very chaotic day. As you can imagine, a horrible tragedy has taken place, and people are working very hard to get stuff done and get it done right. And obviously the pool is having trouble feeding the tape. But again, the president said, make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. Cowardly acts, I think it's fair to say we don't quite have our arms around the magnitude of it all.
I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President Bush, a short time ago, in his second remarks of the day, the president initially was headed back.
All right, you heard the president there on tape. It's worth mentioning that he was supposed to be on his way back to Washington, but ended up in Louisiana. Yet another indication of just how serious an attack on America this has been. They are harboring the president in places where he would not normally be at a time like this. But he pledged there to hunt down and find the people responsible, which is an easy thing to say. We have a couple of experts now to just sort of challenge whether or not it is an easy thing to in fact do. Reg Whitaker is a military expert at York University, and he joins us live from our Victoria studios. Mr. Whitaker, how easy do you think, given the sophistication of this attack, it will be to find who is behind it?
It will be very difficult. I mean, in a sense, it's kind of Pearl Harbor 2001 for America, but unlike Pearl Harbor, the question of who exactly did this is the serious issue. that, and American intelligence clearly failed. It clearly failed. It failed to alert the United States to this attack, which was in fact incredibly coordinated, strategically quite extraordinary that it could have been mounted. It broke particular kinds of security safeguards, such as the security mounted at airports, that a series of commercial airliners could have been hijacked simultaneously, virtually, is quite astounding. And tracking this down is going to be very difficult, and there will be, I think, many calls in the United States that will demand vengeance, and I think it's very considerable concern that that the appropriate authorities only act when they are in fact certain about what actually happened and who really was responsible.
You made the analogy there, and it's not a bad one, to Pearl Harbor, about the impact that this may have on the American psyche at this point. Pearl Harbor brought America into the war. What do you think this attack on its soil by terrorists will do?
Well, again, it's not a war like World War II, and it's a very different kind of war. And one of the concerns, I think, has to be that there isn't an overreaction, that they don't strike back just for the sake of striking back. It will certainly be a concern, I would think, that assuming indeed that it was Osama bin Laden and those associated with him, and it's very difficult to imagine any other candidate that would have the resources to carry out this kind of attack other than the bin Laden organization. That if indeed this is the case, that there's concern, for example, I'm sure that Americans and of Arab and Islamic origin are very worried about a backlash being directed against them in general. It's a very what's particularly, I guess, diabolical, if you like, about this kind of attack is that it leaves the target, the United States, in a position of really not being able to strike back. Where does one hit the bin Laden organization, for example? It's not something, clearly they didn't know, they had not penetrated that organization, they didn't have intelligence in advance about what was happening, and so they don't have intelligence about where to actually find these people and track them down. And there will be a temptation, I suppose, to choose Afghanistan because that's the nearest thing to a kind of identifiable geographical base. And it may well be that the Taliban regime, which does not have too many friends outside Afghanistan in the world anyway, was in fact complicit in this. But again, it's difficult to find the target to hit back at. They knew in Pearl Harbor who to hit back at, and they eventually did. But it's much more difficult here.
All right, Reg Whitaker from our CH facilities in Victoria. I want to thank you for joining us today with your perspectives. I wanted to see whether or not Yitzhak Sokolov, a terrorism expert well known to many Canadians, is available. I was given to understand that he might be available in our Toronto or Ottawa studios. Can I get some information on that? Because this raises... Mr. Sokolov, hi, thank you for joining us at this hour. I want to talk about, you are a terrorism expert. Let me just ask you in the big picture here, have you ever seen an attack as sophisticated as this one?
I think it's very rare that there have been attacks as coordinated as this over such a large area with casualties that I think exceed any casualties that have ever taken place, unless one sees Pearl Harbor as being the ultimate terrorist attack, and this probably takes precedence over that as well.
Now there's always a sort of a struggle between authorities to try to figure out what terrorists are up to, and terrorists kind of counter strategize with what the authorities are. From what you have seen today, the degree of sophistication, how quickly they were able to carry it out and in such a short time frame, what have you learned as a terrorism expert about how vulnerable North America is to terrorism now?
I think what we've learned is that all of our fears were true. I think we've learned that we underestimated the true depravity or the level of evil to which these people are willing to go. Those of us who study terrorists, or those of us who study the incitement that's been going on over the last number of years, trying to create suicide bombers, who are unfortunately something that we've been dealing with almost on a daily basis in Israel in the last year, have become aware of the fact that these are people who will stop at nothing, and understand as well that their goals in the final analysis are not rational in terms that we can understand. I would also just like to say that as an Israeli, as a human being, I think we should all be thinking and extending our condolences to the families who paid this ultimate price for no reason whatsoever today and over the next weeks as we struggle with the casualty list.
All right. Is there anything at this point, do you think, I mean, we sit here in Canada with a level of comfort that this is all coming to us through our television sets. Some of us may not have that level of comfort because we have friends and relatives that we're worried about who are in Manhattan or in and around the Pentagon or on any myriad number of airplanes that have been hijacked and rammed into places today. Is there anything in Canada, do you think, that we need to be thinking of? Is there a reason that the complacency that we feel should be disappearing?
I think the complacency of all the democracies needs to disappear. And I think our assumption that if one can appease the forces of evil, we will get something out of it also needs to disappear. The pain of those individuals is enormous. We in Israel have been facing this for the last year on a regular basis. I think even on a personal level, I lost a member of a baseball team that I coach, a 14-year-old child who was savagely killed. I think we have to understand that words really matter, and that the words of incitement that try to create suicide bombers, and essentially that's what we have today, are suicide bombers who entered planes and killed thousands of people, those efforts actually bear fruit. And what I have been studying the last number of years is how the different organizations, Palestinian and other, create individuals, human beings who grew up as children with mothers who loved them and cared about them, and turned into these, horrendously bestial people. They've used, in order to do this, the most technically important advance in the history of humanity in terms of brainwashing, which is television. And we see movies that have been produced in which children, 11-year-old children are targeted, and people try to convince them to kill themselves, in which young adults and adolescents are told that the world to come, heaven, is vastly better than the world that they're in, and the only way to get there is by being part of jihad, of the Islamic quest for martyrdom, to kill Israelis, to kill Americans. We have films that we've seen in which members of Islamic priests or qadis stand up in mosques and tell people that they should kill and butcher Israelis, Jews, Americans, wherever they see them. And I think it's time that we take them at their word. What they say they will do, they actually will do.
All right, Mr. Sokolov, thank you for joining us from Toronto today. As Mr. Sokolov quite rightly pointed out, we all feel the enormous sense of loss in New York, in America today, and among the Canadians among us who have friends and relatives that are there as well. Not only, let me move on to San Diego now, because this story is not over yet. There are still a couple of planes that are unaccounted for at this hour by officials from United Airlines, and we have our Global National's Tara Nelson is at San Diego Airport, I believe, on the phone. And Tara, what can you tell us?
Kevin, I'm actually at NBC News in Los Angeles this morning. What I can tell you is that reports coming into the newsroom here, and I have to stress they're unconfirmed at this point, but what we are hearing is that San Diego FBI are looking into a report that there is still one flight unaccounted for from Los Angeles Airport that may have been hijacked. What we're hearing is that it's still in the air. They don't know where it is bound for, but it is unaccounted for, and I have to stress again, at this point, that is unconfirmed.
All right, now we have a great number of these flights as we count them down that we're heading either to Los Angeles or from. Can you describe the scenes that you've seen on LA television there of what it's like at LAX at the airport?
Absolutely. There is a real California connection here because 3 flights were bound for LAX and 1 flight was bound for San Francisco this morning. Really what I can tell you is it's pandemonium here, and I noticed it from the moment I got down to the lobby of the hotel this morning. Because all flights had been canceled, the hotel lobby was packed with people. Everybody was gathered around TV sets, convention rooms, the doors were thrown open, and people had just abandoned the conventions basically to stand around the TV sets. At this point, the LA is on full tactical alert. The LAFCI is on tactical alert. Most financial offices are closed. The government buildings are closed. LA Airport, they initially just canceled flights. Now it's closed and they're trying to evacuate. All of the amusement parks, like Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, they're closed. The major movie studios are closed. The Latin Grammy Awards that were supposed to go live tonight have been canceled. Now in San Francisco, the Golden Gate and the Bay Bridge are still open at this time, but authorities are increasing patrols there. All the federal buildings in San Francisco and Oakland have been closed, and all the skyscrapers have been evacuated. We're just hearing as well that all of the border crossings between Mexico and the United States and the United States and Canada have been closed as well.
Yeah, that's true, Tara. Thank you very much for checking in with us on this, and we'll be talking to you a little bit later in the day as we get the pictures from Los Angeles of the heartache that is going on there as hundreds and hundreds of people wait to hear official word on whether or not their relatives, their friends, their families were part of those many planes that crashed today. Tara Nelson was talking a little bit about the borders and the situation in this country. Let's go to Sarah Daniels now, who has been calling around the BC area to find out what's happening here. Sarah.
Well, and what's been happening locally is, of course, happening internationally as well. Many ports now throughout North America, and probably farther south too, even including the Panama Canal, are now on a state of high alert. That is a level 3 security, third level high alert. So that means here in Vancouver, for instance, we have two piers. We have the Ballantyne Pier and Canada Place. They're now completely closed off to the public. Now, this is also going to be the same sort of thing that you'll find in ports along the St. Lawrence Seaway and all up and down the east and west coast. In fact, the representative I was speaking to from the Port of Vancouver said she's already been in contact with all those different port authorities, and they are all following the same procedures that they would for the highest level of security at their ports. Now, this doesn't necessarily just mean the port itself. It also incorporates road and rail because, of course, it's the infrastructure around the port that is also affected. And so police are on high security or going into high security down at the ports right now. And, in fact, they are having security assessments as we speak. This is also going to affect in the Vancouver area, certainly in other port cities, cruise ships. Though in Vancouver right now, there are no cruise ships in dock. They are evaluating the situation for tomorrow. And certainly any boats that are already anchored or going to be berthing here in Vancouver and other ports as well. So just a note, too, that they do to extend their sympathies to their friends in New York. Apparently, the New York Port Authority was actually located in one of the World Trade Center towers. Kevin?
All right, Sarah, thanks very much. Sarah Daniels checking what's happening with transportation in this country. We heard earlier from David Collinette, the Transportation Minister, just recapping again that all border crossings are in fact closed, although we have heard from our own reporters that people are getting across the border, but that just about every car that attempts it is being searched by security personnel. That's going south. We have not been able to get to the other side of the border, the American side, to check out what's happening there, to find out, as you would expect, that people leaving the United States are being stopped as well. Okay, where are we going now? We are
Vancouver Airport.
Okay, we're going to the security chief of the Vancouver Airport. His name is Kurt Richmond, rather, on some of the activities and some of the precautions that are being taken there.
First, let me say that everyone at the airport and involved in commercial aviation in British Columbia extends our deepest sympathy for the victims and families of those affected by these terrible acts. In light of this morning's events in the United States and keeping safety and security as our #1 priority, Transport Canada has directed that all civil and commercial aviation in Canada is to be suspended at this time. There will be no departures from Vancouver International Airport until further notice, and aircraft currently en route to Canada and the United States will be landed safely. Under direction from Transport Canada, Vancouver International Airport is clearing all post-security and airside areas of passengers and non-essential staff. The Vancouver International Airport is essentially closed until further notice. At this time, we would ask that public and passengers not come to the airport. Please check our website, www.yvr.ca, and contact your airline for additional information as it becomes available.
All right, that was Kurt Richmond, who is the head of security at the Vancouver International Airport, or actually the president of the Vancouver International Airport there. All right, we are still struggling with what is happening on the Canadian side of this story. I don't think we can go to Ottawa yet, so let's rejoin CNN as they continue to watch what's happening down there.
Respond accordingly, but I would also caution here that we should be careful about jumping to certitude about what happened here. We'll know this soon enough, and we'll also know, be able to find out why this was not detected.
I think that's just an extraordinarily important point, that what is going on right now at this moment is more important than why it happened. And what is going on is you have thousands of people, we presume in a number of different places, whose lives are at risk, who have been hurt, who need to be rescued, who need to be treated, who need to be taken to hospitals. In New York, in northern New Jersey, where the bulk of the injured are being treated here, there is a critical shortage of blood. Hospital officials are desperately seeking help there. And as Mr. Berger said, time enough later to figure out who and how we deal with it. Ambassador Holbrook, Sandy Berger, thank you both for joining us. William Rodriguez, I just was looking down. There are literally down below us on by Madison Square Garden, which is where we're located, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people on the corner, and they are just looking out. And from where they are, they can't see very much but the smoke. And I can't tell you if something has happened, but and it's lunch hour here, and there's just a lot of people, as there have been all morning, looking at a street that is almost empty. As New York, the southern part of New York, Penn Station by the Garden, essentially being evacuated to allow emergency crews to get to the scene. William Rodriguez is a maintenance worker at the Trade Center, I believe. In any case, he's on the phone with us now. Mr. Rodriguez, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Tell me where you were when, well, which of the two buildings were you in?
I work on the building 1, the one that got hit the first time.
Tell me what happened.
I was on the basement, which is a support floor for the maintenance company, and we hear like a big rumble, not like an impact, like a rumble, like something like moving furniture on a massive way. And all of a sudden we hear another rumble, and a guy comes running into our office, and all his skin was off his body. All his skin, we went crazy. We started screaming. We told him to get out. We took everybody out of the office outside to the loading dock area, and then I went back in. And when I went back in, I saw people. I heard people that were stuck on an elevator, on a freight elevator, because all the elevators went down, and water was going in, and they were probably getting drowned. And we get a couple of pipes and opened the elevator, and we got the people out. I went back up, and I saw one of the officers from the Port Authority Police. I've been working there for 20 years, so I knew him very well. My routine on the World Trade Center is in charge of the staircase. And since there was no elevator service, I have the master key for all the staircase doors. So I went up with the police officer and a group of firemen. As we went up, there was a lot of people coming down, and while we got, it was very difficult to get up.
Mr. Robert.
Just listening to the gentleman finishing of what he saw, first-hand account. Still trying to track down, because the story is also developing here at home in Canada. David Viano is our Ottawa bureau chief. And David, Foreign Affairs, I guess. What are they telling Canadians that they should be doing at this point?
Stay away from the airports, wait, be calm, and they're huddling. Let's face it, John Manley and other cabinet ministers are on their way back to Ottawa. We reported earlier that there was a cabinet meeting today, but apparently that was just a rumor, and the regular meeting will be set for tomorrow. The Prime Minister is still huddling with his senior officials, and we are told that he may yet make himself available to address the nation this afternoon. We are getting a lot of phone calls here in Ottawa, however, from viewers who are wanting to know how they can donate blood to be sent to the United States, to donate rooms, and the Canadian Blood Services have told us that they are in their own emergency meetings and that they will be setting up emergency clinics across the country so that Canadians who want to donate blood to send to the U.S. can do so. And as I mentioned, people who own motels, houses are phoning here saying if planes land in Ottawa, we'd like to make our homes available for the Americans if they need it.
All right, and as you said, the Prime Minister later this afternoon is expected to say something to Canadians. Has he had any public statements at this point that we know of? Is he in Ottawa? Have they taken any special precautions to protect his safety?
He is in Ottawa, and the Sergeant-at-Arms has issued a statement here saying that security has been upgraded on Parliament Hill and around Parliament Hill. A lot of the stores in downtown Ottawa are now closed, and there is yet another bomb scare. And again, I caution when we say this at the Israeli embassy. I hate to say it also that this happens routinely, and the police are there, but they're not taking it as seriously. At the American embassy in downtown Ottawa, there are at least a dozen Ottawa police. They're there because the RCMP has called them for assistance, but it seems pretty calm at this time.
All right, we heard earlier that the CN Tower, for example, a place where Canadians would be likely to gather as tourists, or tourists would go, had been closed down today. Has there been any activity on Parliament Hill to try to restrict movement?
Parliament Hill has basically been shut down. The Sergeant-at-Arms has issued a statement saying that, well, there is really nothing to fear. They want to urge Canadians not to be afraid, that in this case, discretion is a better part of valor. So we'll opt for safety, and everything is being shut down very quietly, and come back when things are nicer.
All right, thank you. David Viano from our Ottawa Bureau updating us on Canadian authorities, which, like American authorities, are still struggling to get their arms around the enormity of what has gone on in the United States today. It is a story that, in my professional life, I never thought would happen. It just tumbled out of control for about 2 hours, an incredible series of events unlike any we have seen in North America ever since, perhaps, as we heard earlier today, Pearl Harbor in the 1940s. Let's recap those events again. It began at around 8:42 this morning, when what we saw was almost unbelievable. There was a tower, one of the towers, the Twin Towers, aflame, and an airplane, a 737 from Boston, crashed into the middle of the second tower, lighting it on fire. We now know there were 92 souls aboard that plane as it crashed into the Twin Towers on a flight from Boston to Los Angeles. Then we move shortly thereafter to an incredible series of events. We can see another explosion, the collapse of that tower. Shortly thereafter, there may have been a second explosion which damaged the infrastructure, or it may have just been what happened as a result of the damage from the plane smashing into that one. We're still not sure exactly what happened with the second tower, but we assume there was another crash. It might have been a large plane, it might have been a small one. And then shortly thereafter at 9:57, the Pentagon, a 747 jet, slammed into the middle of the Pentagon, the American military powerhouse, and lit it on fire. Casualties there, still don't know the numbers. And then barely 15 minutes later, the other tower collapsed in New York City. Again, there were reports of yet another explosion that might have precipitated that collapse. We do not know at this hour. Authorities are still scrambling to just rescue people and to try to treat the injured. Hospitals outside of Manhattan are on high alert. There have been jammed with casualties. New York, thankfully, has a lot of hospitals. They are able to treat the wounded and the severely injured. We've heard a lot of stories of people, emerging from the building on fire. The smoke damage throughout the city. After these buildings collapsed, you could see the veil of smoke throughout Manhattan from helicopters nearby, an almost impossible picture. We are used to pictures of catastrophic events like this generated by Hollywood. This was, of course, a very real one. The loss of life unknown at this point. Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York, saying it is likely in the thousands. That is just from the Twin Towers, which at this time of the day would have been packed with tens of thousands of people. We do not know the loss of life at this point throughout the United States on any number of airplanes that have been hijacked and rammed into either buildings or the ground. Pittsburgh Airport, another one United Airlines has lost, Flight 93, a Boeing 747 from Newark to San Francisco. They are not saying where that has crashed, but it has in fact crashed. The only confirmed numbers of dead we have at this hour are 266 people on 4 flights across the United States. We do not know their nationalities, and we do not know their identities at this point, and it will take time. There are some numbers that you can call if you have relatives in the United States and you think that you might know somebody who is on it. I don't know whether we have the Foreign Affairs number standing by, but the Foreign Affairs office in Ottawa has set up a 1-800 number, and we're just searching for that momentarily to give you that number in case you are interested. That's the number for Foreign Affairs, 1-800-387-3124. American Airlines, 1-800-245-0999. United Airlines, 1-800-932-8555. Those, as you can imagine, are jammed. We're going to go live now to the legislature in Ontario. This is Mike Harris, of course, the Ontario Premier, with his first comments.
Okay. The shocking events of the last hours have touched us all, and today's sad and horrific violence concerns every citizen of the world. While apparently directed towards the United States, our neighbor and our longtime ally, these evil and despicable acts are an affront to the peaceful men and women of the world everywhere. Our thoughts and prayers are first with the countless individuals and families whose lives have been affected by these tragedies. Their loss, their pain, their sorrow is shared by every human being everywhere. We have offered assistance to the United States and New York governments. I have instructed all branches of the provincial government that Ontario will provide whatever support is needed. I know many individual citizens of Ontario will want to lend their personal assistance, but at this point it is too early to determine what specific help might be required. Those able to do so are encouraged to donate blood. Those with medical or other special expertise may subsequently be called upon, and announcements about where and how individuals can help will be made as that information becomes available. I want to say to all of the people of Ontario and indeed Canada that there is no report of any known threat to Canada. However, I have directed provincial officials to work with the federal and municipal governments to take every precaution and to coordinate our responses. Emergency measures officials continue to meet. Finally, if Ontario can do anything to help U.S. authorities track down those responsible for this cowardly violence, rest assured we will leave no stone unturned. And I am personally committed to doing everything in my power to assist. Again, I offer on behalf of all Ontarians our sympathies and our prayers to all of the families who are being affected by today's events. Before I leave to go back to assist with coordinating our response, I want to introduce Dr. James Young, who is responsible for public safety. He heads up Emergency Measures Ontario, and he will answer any specific questions that you may have now, and he will lead Ontario's response. James.
Thank you. Thank you, Premier. Okay. Are there any questions that ladies and gentlemen have?
Dr. Young, what specific things is provincial officials looking at to help New York State?
Well, there are a number of potential areas, and with any disaster such as this, it will take really some time for New York to determine exactly what they need and the scope and nature of their disaster. But immediately it comes to mind that the first and foremost thing that we'll look at is whether we can offer any assistance in the healthcare field, because the priority becomes on the living as a #1 priority. The second potential measure would be with search and rescue, and offering assistance in regards to search and rescue, and disaster management comes to mind as a third area. And in the long term, obviously there may be tremendous forensic problems and investigative problems, and the province is willing to offer any assistance in regards to those matters as well.
Do you think that any of the victims in New York City could be brought up here for treatment?
It certainly, if that was asked and the province could provide that assistance, the province would do so. And plans are being made now that if that is an issue that we can assist, we'll do so.
Donald, how many beds do you have at your disposal in the area that could help New York?
We don't know specifically a number of beds right now, but the hospital certainly immediately sprang into action with the disaster this morning, and are looking very carefully at what they do and what they don't do in the way of elective surgery right now, in order to, until the scope of the disaster is understood, ensure that in fact that we can be of any assistance that we can be.
Dr. Young, the Premier refers to the fact while there's no report of any known threat to Canada, he's instructed provincial officials to take every precaution and to coordinate our responses. What precautions is the Ontario government contemplating at this point?
Well, the number one thing that we did at 11:08 this morning was to fully mobilize the Provincial Operations Center. This brings into force all of the ministries of government. There are also meetings and discussions taking place at all levels with the federal government and municipal officials. Various deputy ministers within sectors such as health have held meetings and discussed matters among themselves so that they can mutually cooperate, as have Emergency Measures Canada, Emergency Measures Ontario, and the municipal emergency operations, for example, Ottawa, Toronto, Windsor are all mobilized at this point in time. And so that kind of coordination and cooperation and discussion is taking place to look after any problems that currently exist and to, with the anticipation that we may be able to assist.
No tangible examples of any measures that have been taken yet, however?
The
preparations for what New York State might ultimately...
That's right. There haven't been any necessary measures other than probably the Ministry of Transportation, the Ontario Provincial Police have been looking at traffic flows in and around the border points. The airport is obviously on heightened security, and the necessary measures have been taken relative to that, but nothing concrete has been necessary at this point in time because there has not been any perceived threat to Canadians.
Have you sent provincial employees home, or are they still all at work as far as your...
No, the provincial employees in most centers are still at work. There are a few buildings that provincial employees have left. Most commonly for one of two reasons: either the sensitivity of the area that they work near, or if they're in a building owned by a landlord who decided they wanted to close the building, then those are the provincial employees that have been sent home at this point in time.
How many buildings?
I believe 2 or 3. I was the last number I had.
Which ones are they?
400 University Avenue was one, and I think there may be a smaller building nearby, the U.S. consulate that has Ministry of Tourism in it. And then I believe one of the Cadillac Fairview buildings, and it may, I'm not sure exactly which one.
Do we have a plan in place should any event that something like that should happen in Toronto?
Yes, there is a counterterrorism plan in place in Toronto, and this is worked on by all levels of government that include the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipality, in concert with the municipal police. That plan has been looked at and reviewed, and a lot of work done on it, in fact, in recent times.
All right, Ontario, obviously, by virtue of proximity to New York State, a place that is responding to this, as you heard there, donations of blood are being collected and sent to New York State, and also they have heightened the security along the border, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, which where you might expect people to try to escape from. A couple of things. We're been told that the Prime Minister of Canada will make a statement, be available to reporters in about 25 minutes' time. We will endeavor to bring that to you live. The Governor General, Adrian Clarkson, has just sent a note to U.S. President George Bush, which says, in part, "I am shocked by the tragedy occurring today in your country, and Canadians join me in expressing you and to the American people our deepest sympathies. We want you to know of our enormous sorrow for the victims and their families and everyone touched by this morning's most tragic events." That from the Governor General, Adrian Clarkson. We'll be hearing from Prime Minister Chrétien in a couple of minutes. I'm going to ask Martin Himmel now. We heard, we saw actually what New York looks like today. It looks like a war zone, and Martin Himmel knows what a real war zone looks like. He has covered the Middle East for any number of years for Canadian television. And Martin, it occurs to me that this is what we witnessed today, perhaps in a larger geopolitical sense, is much more than the Israeli-Arab context. It seems to be something larger.
Well, that's true. Basically, what we've seen until now is a Palestinian-Israeli struggle over a piece of land, but it really is a reflection of something much bigger, much wider. And that is, throughout history, Islamic militants have viewed the struggle really as a struggle between Western values and Islamic Eastern values. And that struggle has broken out into wars in various times in history, and this is really an example of what we're seeing right now. Basically, Islamic radicals believe the West is the enemy, Western values are the enemy, Western permissiveness is the enemy, and that this Western society has to be contended with, and I think what we're seeing today is a personification of that. Until now, we've never seen, obviously, such impact and such power in a terrorist attack, and I think this is indicative of the fact that whoever did this, whether it's Osama bin Laden or another group, they have to have a tremendous amount of money and state infrastructure behind them.
I was struck at the audacity of the political statement that whoever is behind this made by choosing the targets that they chose. I mean, this wasn't just an act of violence, an act of terrorism. This was a political message, wasn't it?
I think it's a political and cultural and economic message. They chose the symbol of the free world, capitalist, open society that we all know, the heart of New York City, the heart of its financial center, the heart of the liberal society that we all ascribe to. And they made it very clear that this is their target of attack, that basically Western society is their target of attack.
All right, Martin, if you can stand by for a little while, there will be developments as we go along. Just to remind everybody, appreciate it, Martin Himmel, a correspondent with Canadian television who has deep experience in the Middle East and the conflict there. We are still watching what is happening across this country now on airports and airlines. What the state of the information, as far as we know it right now, is that flights are not traveling within North America at this point. Ones that are in the air are trying not to land in the United States, but to try to land in Canada as well. We are joined by Michelle Bosser, who is a Global Alberta reporter in Edmonton. And Michelle, what can you tell us about the situation there?
Well, basically, the Edmonton International Airport here has been completely shut down. Shut down probably around 9:30 this morning. At first, it seemed like most of the American flights were simply going to be delayed about 7 hours. That's what we were told about people trying to get there. And then about a half hour later, they decided to cancel all domestic and international flights. Obviously, a lot of people concerned, upset. We spoke with a number of American travelers, actually. One young woman in particular with a young baby from Connecticut who was on the tarmac and found out that she wouldn't be able to fly home today, and then when she got inside the terminal, found out exactly what happened, called her husband right away to make sure that he was okay. Obviously very upset and quite scared, actually. She said that scared, not only she has a number of friends in New York City, but also scared for herself to get back on a flight, to try to figure out how she exactly is going to get home in the end. Just very upset about what had happened. We do know that now a couple of flights have actually been diverted to Edmonton. We had United Airlines actually landed about 10:30 this morning, and about some passengers are presently being loaded into school buses, parking type buses. They're being shipped to the airport right now, and then will be placed in hotels throughout the Edmonton area. And we also found out that Air France landed about a half hour ago or so. In total, about 400 passengers look like they're going to be making their way through the terminal. We're not quite sure where exactly they came from, but they have landed, and we're just waiting now for more information.
All right, Michelle, I know you're not near the bases there, but has there been any Canadian military activity? Do we know whether any planes are landing at bases at Cold Lake, for instance, in Alberta?
No, I'm not aware. I'm not aware of that right now, and haven't had any information regarding that. I do know that we have been checking out the activity going on at the garrison, but I'm not clear exactly what's happening over there.
All right, Michelle Bosser, thanks very much for reporting live from Edmonton International Airport, a story that we have been seeing at several airports across the country. I want to see whether or not I can go to Jeremy Spindlove, who is an author, director of security at Vancouver Airport in the 90s, from 93 to 95. He was also a security manager for British Airways from 1977 to 1988. I was told that he was probably standing by in the newsroom. Jeremy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Give me a sense of what we've seen today. Has there been just a colossal breach of security among U.S. authorities?
I think at this stage it's very difficult to say that. Obviously, there's been some serious problems in the U.S. Affecting aviation. 5 aircraft possibly hijacked all at one time and used as a terrorist attack on government buildings is phenomenal and almost beyond belief. To say at this stage there's been a huge breach in security is probably a little far-fetched. But I think if you look at the picture of the aircraft flying into the World Trade Center, it certainly seemed to be under certain control there. So it obviously begs the question as to whether there was a pilot of whichever airline in charge of that flight at the time of that crash.
Now, to this scenario, I mean, you look at the pictures and you just cannot believe that this has actually happened. In your experience, your long experience in security and terrorism, did you ever attend a meeting where someone said, well, what if this happens?
I think we've been through scenarios before, and I was in the United States some years ago on a conference with the FAA looking at what prospects would be for the next round of terrorist-type attacks to aviation in particular. And I don't think anyone envisaged a scenario as drastic as what we're seeing played out in the United States today.
And as sophisticated and as coordinated? I mean, there had to be either, well, I mean, you tell me, what did there have to be, aside from a lot of money, for someone to be able to carry out something like this?
Well, I think the question is who could be capable of doing that. Obviously, the first name that springs to mind is Osama bin Laden and his group, but this is obviously a well-planned, well-coordinated, with a lot of logistics involved to get 5 aircraft hijacked at the same time, if that was the case, and then flown to the targets within 40 minutes of each other. There's a lot of coordination, a lot of planning, and no doubt the intelligence forces in the United States will be looking very sharply at how that could have happened and whether they've missed a beat somewhere.
Well, and I raise the issue of money because it seems to me, and I don't know nearly as much about this as you do, but it seems to me that there had to be a lot of money behind something this ambitious and this sophisticated.
I would think there would be, and whether there's been some assistance to these terrorist groups, whoever they are, whether they're being assisted by just one group or maybe homegrown terrorism is involved in this as well, it's really too early to say.
All right, sir. As you watched what was happening this morning, given your personal experience, security at airports, and your interest in terrorism today, give us a sense. Could you believe it?
I couldn't quite believe it. I phoned my co-author the moment I saw it on CNN, and he thought I was actually joking. But when you hear it on the news and then you see it, very shocking, and our heart goes out to everybody in the U.S., and let's hope we can get to the bottom of how this actually came about.
All right, Jeremy Spindlove, we want to thank you for joining us from the National Newsroom today. We appreciate your insights. Talking about Vancouver Airport, where Mr. Spindlove used to be the Director of Security there from 93 to 95, let's go to Michelle Miller, who is live from Vancouver. We heard a little bit earlier, Michelle, from John Daly, your colleague, that some flights he thought were being diverted now to Vancouver. What's the latest?
Well, we think there's probably been about a half dozen flights or so that have been diverted. We've talked to a few people on those flights. A lot of them were flight attendants and pilots, quite anxious to get back home and see for themselves. They just got word of this as they were making their landing, and as they were told they were diverted here. Some of them didn't even know the reasons why. Now, just behind me, the scene that has been played out throughout this airport for most of the day. You see tired and weary travelers huddled around television sets. They're not really saying much. There isn't much to say. There's not even a lot to talk about. They're worried, they're anxious, and they wonder why some diabolical plan like this was carried out in the first place. I can also tell you that security here at the International Airport is on extreme alert. We had seen dozens of RCMP officers, probably about 40, arrive for a briefing. There they are. We have the pictures of them. They're going into their briefing meeting. As we speak, here, I'll let you listen to this piece of tape.
Some of them looked very, very shaken that this would happen, and very, there was anger too. A lot of them were, I think, talking about, as I say, about war. And that was their feeling at the time, and the fact that this was something that they had predicted would be happening at some stage.
Can we ask you
I mean, what it's like to be up in the air when you hear about these things going on.
Well, when we were in the air, we really didn't know what was going on. All we heard was the security measures. We were diverted, and that was all we knew. So everything I've learned is just since we've been landed.
And you've heard what happened. You've heard about the two planes that...
Just as I passed the TVs, yeah. That's all I know.
Does it make you wonder how you'd act in a situation like that? This was a hostage, this was a hijacking.
It does. And I mean, I can't give you an answer, but it does make me think. And that's really bad.
Are you feeling anxious about what's going on at home for you?
I am a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see, where things go. I mean, they've created something that who knows what's going to happen.
It's carting away a scanner right now. They're just carting it away. It was here. It's something that they use to check the luggage. Vancouver International Airport, there are some officials who have just taken that piece of equipment away. We don't know why at this point. Now, in that piece of tape, you did hear from a first officer. I believe he was with Northwest Airlines. You also heard from a volunteer greeter here at the International Airport who's had to deal with many of these stranded travelers who were diverted their flights.
Michelle, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you for a moment here. We're getting words from Ottawa that the Prime Minister Chrétien, is making a statement in French. So stand by. Thanks for your report from Vancouver. This is the Prime Minister speaking to reporters in Ottawa right now.
There's nobody from Canada that's been affected. For the security, I have been in touch with the ministers and with the head of the agencies to make sure that everything was to remain secure, and we said to everybody to remain calm. I would like to thank Canadians who have kept their calm in these last 4 hours, and that we hope that the situation will come to a little bit more normality quickly. Pour moi, je pense que dans les circonstances, il nous faut prier pour les familles et puis les citoyens américains. Et j'ai assuré les autorités américaines que le Canada ferait tout en son pouvoir pour les aider dans cette situation très tragique, une crise qu'on n'a pas connue depuis très longtemps. So I hope that Canadians will show their solidarity.
The latest information, obviously, from Mayor Giuliani out of New York City, and we have a brand new information for you also. We can clarify those 3 aircraft, the CF-18s that were spotted in Western Canada, indeed humanitarian missions headed to the United States from northern BC, and Leslie Jones will have all the details in the newscast.
The workers do have listening devices. They also have
We're going to go now back to the press conference for the latest from New York.
And we're making every effort to get the people out of there.
Are there indications that there are people alive, though? In other words, are they hearing things with the listening devices, or are the dogs hitting on scent?
We can't say at this time.
Is there any way to approach the area through a tunnel?
Still on a heightened state of alert today?
Absolutely,
And
yes.
how long will that remain in effect as far as the emergency?
It's going to last until further notice.
Commissioner, could you explain to us why there are so many trucks around
the World Trade Center, putting the towers back up as a symbol of anything right now?
There's no question we're going to rebuild. I can't say that we know the exact nature yet of how we're going to do that, and we'd like to meet with lots of people.
Do you believe that the skyline will be whole again?
The skyline will be whole again. Exactly, what will be there, I think we have to leave to giving some people some time to consider it and to think about it. And also, the reality is that the people in New York City are going to be whole again. We're very, very strong.
Is there any sense of the cost at this point, and the state, the city, the federal government is paying for the relief effort?
Governor?
In my view, that's the last thing you think about at this point. We're not concerned about who's picking up the tab. We're just doing everything we can to try to make sure the relief efforts are the strongest possible. And we'll sort out the costs and the economic consequences later.
Is there any way to try to approach through the subway tunnel to perhaps people trapped in the areas below? Is that conceivable to do? Is that I have no idea. Is that something that could be tried?
Excuse me?
To try to approach through a subway tunnel to get perhaps...
And they're looking at every access area to that area, the rescue workers.
Has that been tried as far as you know?
No, specifically, I don't know, but I'm sure they're looking.
Last question. Mr. Mayor, could you tell us
the police officer and where he was trapped? How he was trapped?
We just got it within the last hour or so when the mayor was doing his last briefing. I'll have more details for you the next time we talk.
Was that the cell phone call? Was that the first on the cell phone?
I can't say.
Mr. Mayor, could you tell us?
Yes, one last question. City services. Right.
What garbage collect, what for people across the rest of the city, what kind of services are interrupted and what should they expect in the next several days?
In the 4 boroughs outside of Manhattan, services should remain largely the same. Maybe a little interruption because we're calling upon people in the sanitation department and some of the other departments to help. But services in the 4 boroughs outside of Manhattan should remain largely the same. Services in Manhattan will obviously be somewhat interrupted, but we're going to try to get them back on schedule as soon as possible. In northern Manhattan, services will remain largely the same, and we're going to try to restore as much of southern Manhattan as possible over the next day or two. And what the advice that I would give to people today, if they're home from work, is to go about a normal day. Take the day as an opportunity to go shopping, be with your children, do things, get out, don't feel locked in. One of the things that we should do is to show that we can go about our lives. That this is a horrible thing that's happened. It's a terrible thing. I don't think we even understand yet the full dimension of how this is going to affect us with the loss of life that's taken place. But the reality is we're going to go on with our lives. The city is here. It's functioning. There are millions of people here. They're safe. And they should go about their lives now. They should go to stores. They should go to restaurants. They should do the things that they normally do. And, we're going to work real hard to get the city focused in that direction. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we will come back for a briefing later on this afternoon.
Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who said, "We are going to rebuild. We're going to be stronger," after yesterday's attack on New York City. Governor George Pataki said, "We will not be intimidated. We will not lose our freedom." The press conference in New York City. We are expecting also a press conference from President Bush. That's upcoming. He will speak to
Governor, how long
Canada and to the United States, to the world, at 10:45 Eastern.
Absolutely, and of course, leading a normal life, which is what Giuliani is talking about, seems like a daunting task right now as the world still tries to come to grips with what happened yesterday in the United States and the search and rescue efforts that are still underway. We can give you an update on the 3 aircraft that were reported in northern British Columbia. These are humanitarian missions being escorted by CF-18s, and Leslie Jones is going to have the latest on that in the complete wrap-up of all of the things unfolding this morning.
Yeah, we can, obviously the airspace right now with everything, the skies are closed right now. There is a lot of concern about if radar might pick up some airplanes, and so that was reported, and good thing that nobody panicked about that.
Also, we can tell you that George W. Bush did have a conversation with Jean Chrétien. The Canadian Prime Minister was looking to speak with him to give our support. Clearly, this is in the form of support, these humanitarian missions. We're going to show you some pictures now of Ottawa, where the flags are flying at half-mast, and these are flowers just on Wellington Street in front of, outside the American Embassy. Obviously, Canadians showing their support for and mourning. I think we're all mourning, really, aren't we? The incredible loss of life that is unfolding in the United States.
By the way, the donation number for the Canadian Red Cross, 1-800-418-1111. That's 1-800-418-1111. There is a Canadian connection, at least it's being reported, potentially with a couple of these hijackers who came through Portland, may have come through Vancouver or British Columbia through the West Coast. There are a lot of stories, a lot of information and misinformation you have to be very careful about right now. Stuff out of Boston, stuff out of Florida, and the name Osama bin Laden is still being bandied about as the prime suspect of these attacks yesterday.
That's right. Leslie Jones has the latest.
Good morning, Rod. Good morning, Lisa. We now have an explanation for those 3 planes that were being tracked over Western Canada this morning. The Defense Department confirms that the planes are humanitarian flights originating from British Columbia. The statement comes after CNN reported that the 3 planes are in the air near Vancouver and that they were being tracked by Canadian CF-18s. The planes are being escorted because of the ban on civilian flights in North America. This morning, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien spoke with U.S. President George Bush. The White House says Bush thanked Chrétien for his offers of help and the concern that he expressed on behalf of all Canadians. But they also spoke about security issues. And there is a report this morning suggesting a link between Canada and yesterday's terrorist attacks. The Boston Herald says that 2 men suspected of being involved crossed into the United States from Canada. Boston police have seized a car left by 5 Arab men who boarded a plane that was later hijacked. Inside, they found flight training manuals written in Arabic. And one of the men was a trained pilot. The newspaper says 2 of the men had traveled to Boston from Portland, Maine, and authorities believe that the men had just arrived there from Canada. In the midst of the worst terrorist attacks in U.S. history, there is some good news. 7 survivors have reportedly been pulled out of the rubble in New York City this morning. 6 of them were firefighters. 1 was a police officer. The city's mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, says the terrorists responsible for yesterday's attack on the World Trade Center will not break the spirit of the New York people.
Best way they can deal with this right now is not only to deal with their own grief, which we all feel and have, but to show that we're not going to be in any way affected by this, that we're not going to be cowed by it, that we're not afraid, that we're going to go about our business and lead normal lives.
This is the New York skyline this morning, stripped of the monumental twin towers that have dominated it for decades. The streets around what remains of the towers are clogged with rubble and debris. There's no way of knowing how many people are still buried in the wreckage. As many as 50,000 people worked inside the complex, and the death toll is certain to be in the thousands. The terrifying ordeal for passengers on board the hijacked planes was heard by some people on the ground. Mark Bingham was on United Airlines Flight 93 going from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. He managed to make a final call to his mother in California.
I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb.
Moments later, the phone went dead. Flight 93 crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. In business news today, financial markets in Canada and the United States remain closed. And in the weather, cloudy skies in Alberta and BC, sun and cloud through the prairies, clouds with rain in Ontario, and variable skies in Quebec and eastern Canada. Our coverage of the terrorist attack on the United States will continue on Canada AM right after the break. Please stay with us.
There's always something, even though we watch the pictures, the images all day long, there's always something about seeing the newspapers the morning after.
We've had a few newspapers in our lifetime that have had headlines, or newspapers that have been devoted to a lot of coverage, but nothing quite like this. That's the National Post today.
U.S. vows revenge, all of the still photographs. This one to me is just the most haunting. The images here of the people. A lot of people didn't run the pictures, and I think, Rod, you have the other one.
Yeah, and this is from the Globe and Mail today, a day of infamy. There it is, and inside, haunting pictures of one of the people who jumped to their death. And there are other. I think this is there's a insert in the Globe and Mail. We are survivors. It says.
It's unbelievable, but you know.
And this picture on the back, I think. I don't know how close you can get, showing all the rubble. And there it is there.
Obviously, the American papers couldn't make
like
it
a war zone.
Across the border today, but we want to show you some of the headlines from the New York Times and the Boston Globe. So we're going to pop up their websites. Was the best way we could get those, because obviously nothing is coming across the border until the all clear. So when we get that, we're going to pop that up for you.
So, well, you know what's really insignificant, and being a sports announcer as well, is sports at a time like this.
Although wasn't it the first time yesterday?
Major League Baseball canceled.
Since what? D-Day, I understand.
And this is the cover today of Tiger Woods and company at the World Championship, hearing word. And I mean, obviously, sports is the last thing we should be thinking about, or anything else. Entertainment, we should be thinking about the potential survivors, the victims of this catastrophe in New York City. and perhaps orchestrated by the Saudi dissident, Osama bin Laden, who warned apparently 3 weeks ago that he and his followers would carry out an unprecedented attack on United States interests for its support of Israel. An Arab journalist with access to him reported that back on September. That was like 3 weeks ago. He reported that.
Of course, right now the key to all of this is trying to find anybody who's still alive in the rubble. Tom Clark, of course, has been at the scene in Manhattan. Tom, give us some perspective, if you can, on how the mission is going there.
Well, Lisa, perhaps rather than me giving a perspective, I've got two gentlemen with me here who are very deeply involved in the efforts going on, and they're part of sort of the grimmer aspect of this. They're both doctors, and they're in the forensic end of things. Dr. King, first of all, briefly, you're with the New York Guard?
I'm with the New York Guard, and I'm the Chief Surgeon for the Seagate Police Department.
Okay, and Dr. Leibowitz?
I work with the New York Guard as a captain in charge of lectures on weapons of mass destruction, and I'm also with the National Medical Disaster Service.
Okay. Dr. King, let me start with you. You were there when it happened. Briefly tell me what happened. What's your story?
I had gotten down there right after the second plane crash. Chief Robert Abraham activated the police surgeon program so that we could lend a hand in perimeter security, and whatever type of medical experience we had was to help any of the victims. As soon as I got down there, I was looking up at the building. All of a sudden, I turned around, I heard a roar. I thought it was another plane coming in. Standing next to me was an engineer who I don't know, who saved my life that day. Took a hammer, broke through a glass pane window, and dragged me into a building with him. At that point, bodies started flying by us, body parts, plane parts. It was an absolute disaster. 10 seconds more had I been where I was standing, I wouldn't be here today.
Dr. Leibowitz, you've also been down at the site extensively. You were down there this morning, early this morning. Can you tell me what you saw?
Yeah, I was also down there yesterday. I'm a member of the National Medical Disaster System, and I saw it in my office. I was working on a patient, and I saw it on television, and I got in my car and I got down here. I got down before the first plane, actually the second plane, went into the building. I was standing there, and I went down. We know it's going to be their bodies. I wanted to be there to help set up a mortuary so that we can help with the body identification. All of a sudden we heard the building was coming down. I've never seen anything like that in my life. We grabbed each other, firemen, policemen, law enforcement, firemen. They're incredible. I saw some firemen running into the building to triage. Then when the building came down, very few got out. We all ran. We all fell. We all picked each other up. Then it went black. It went as black as your jacket. And I thought I was dead because I couldn't breathe, I couldn't see. Thank God I thought to bring these masks. I started passing them to everybody around me, putting the masks on people, with people all over us. I'm sure I'm walking around with 2 broken ribs right now, but it didn't matter. Then we got up. We started gathering up supplies. A lot of doctors, they ran. We had to break into offices, get offices open to get medical supplies. We got the supplies. I walked around with a shopping cart trying to give people masks, trying to give people anything I could. There wasn't one person who wasn't trying to do what's right. This is a great city. We all came together. Private citizens, law enforcement, they're incredible law enforcement. They went after everybody, calming them down. We did everything we could. Today, Dr. King and I were at the site to see what we could do. The unfortunate thing is the bodies are coming out very slowly, very slowly.
Let me ask you about that, because all day today we're all living with hope that we can find survivors and so on. But from your medical perspective and the fact that both of you have been at the site extensively, how hopeful should we be?
Well, you know what's very unique? Underneath the towers is the PATH train system and the subway system. Those systems are built almost to withstand anything. There's a very good chance that a lot of people went into the tunnels and crawled as far as they could get. There's a hope. There's real hope. But some of the people on the top floors that were above the plane that went into it, I don't know we could really say anything.
I know, and I want to get to this point because I know that both of you have a concern about this, something that hasn't been talked about yet, and that is your concern about the possibility of biological or chemical, what do you call them, incidents in this attack. What do you know about it? What's your fear?
Well, in this situation, The CDC is there right now, and there are forces from USAMRIID, which is the United States Army Infectious Disease Center. They're testing for possibility of anthrax or the bubonic plague, and hopefully not smallpox. If any of those have been disseminated, and any of the people who are down there start to develop symptoms of asthma, shortness of breath, headaches, migraines, and back pains, they should see a physician immediately. I'm not saying there was a biological incident, but should there have been, at least the physicians and the dentists and the health professionals in the New York area can give them some sort of comfort and at least prescribe an antibiotic such as Cipro or doxycycline.
But they are testing for anthrax, smallpox, and bubonic plague right now.
The CDC is down there testing for all of the biological and chemical entities of weapons of mass destruction. In fact, I walk around whenever I go to a scene or any type of disaster with a container of doxycycline. 3 months ago, I took a course intended just for the law enforcement community and the medical community. I had no idea that this bottle would save my life if there was a disaster like this.
Dr. Leibowitz, I mean, if there is the slightest indication of chemical or biological attacks involved in this, I mean, what would this do to the response level that you have so eloquently described already as being magnificent?
First thing I want to say, to take everybody's fear away, unfortunately the incendiary action of that plane blowing up, and I'm sure these guys had everything they could sneak on the plane with them, the incendiary action would have destroyed absolutely all of the biological bubonic smallpox that was in it, because the incendiary would have just destroyed it. However, when something like this is mitigated and something can be expected, you'd want to have a level of understanding of law enforcement, health professionals, military, so that we can at least address what's necessary to put people at ease, to help them. The answers to most of these questions are simple, and they lie in all health professionals. They don't lie just in these people in infectious diseases. Every dentist, every physician, every optometrist, every EMT, every dental hygienist, dental assistant has the ability to know what to do, God forbid, if something happens. We can't allow ourselves to put our heads in the ground anymore. We've got to be able to allow the hospitals to treat those that really need to be treated. And that's why we have to take this country and bring it to a level of understanding in health professionals' offices, so that I don't have to break into medical offices to get supplies. Those people should have been there. Yes, they have families. We all have families. I have 3 children and a wife I love. I love you, Robin. Listen to me. It just never ends. We've got to be out there, and we've known about this, and Dr. King and myself have been trying to get this word out. This Friday, we're giving a course, a health professional's response to the terrorist threat. We put this course together for a year and a half with some of the top people. We were given the course by friends of ours who were in the FBI who wanted us to address things on a private level. I never thought it would take any marketing, but I put the course together and I was labeled someone who was just looking to make a buck. It's not about a buck, it's about what happened today. What they did, it's got to be stopped, and we need to work together like this city worked together. I've never seen anything like it. God bless us.
I can't imagine what sort of day lies ahead for both of you, especially being involved in the forensic side of things, but I want to thank you both very much for speaking with us this morning. Dr. King, Dr. Leibowitz, I appreciate it. Thank you. Lisa and Rod, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. Staggering information from that gentleman regarding a seminar that he was going to give in a couple of days. We're going to go to the Pentagon. We have a briefing from one of the majors at the Pentagon, and we're going to go right now.
As you can see for yourselves, we are still engaged in a very stubborn firefight with parts of the building. We have recently requested some additional special apparatus that will gain entry into the center courtyard of the Pentagon, and we're bringing additional specialized individuals very highly trained in this type of firefighting. We do have on the scene the FEMA team, and they've been here for some time now. As a matter of fact, when they're all here, there will actually be 4 of the what are called USAR FEMA teams. They are starting operations at this point in the crash site. while firefighting operations are going on in the other parts of the Pentagon. We have no estimate at this time of how long it's going to take to get the fire out, or how much additional resources we're going to need. However, as we get information, we will be sharing it with you through the Joint Information Center, which is part of the FBI's Joint Command Post.
Can you tell us about the persistence of the fire? Can we answer this?
Yeah.
Why it is so difficult in that apparently attic area that continues to burn? What is it about that?
The type of construction in the Pentagon is a very, very, I would call stout, World War II type of construction, a lot of concrete, a lot of very thick masonry. On top of that is a wooden roof structure. On top of the wooden roof structure is slate. And so it's just a very, very difficult system to get through, to extinguish, and it takes a lot of cutting with special tools and equipment, and then a lot of hand work by the firefighters to get up in there, and we're trying to get ahead of the fire right now.
Are you going to knock down the sections that are leaning in the damaged part? Is that part of the game plan, or is that still a pending decision?
What typically USAR does is they make sure that they make it as safe as they possibly can for their people, so any debris that is loose or hanging comes down first. And so you'll see that operation where there is some sort of demolition going on, and that is to make sure that any of the loose stuff doesn't fall on the rescue workers.
Chief, a question, but with a very brief prelude. Yesterday, early, of course, most of the smoke in the fire seemed to be fuel from the plane. And then late yesterday afternoon, that had dissipated or been put out, and there was white smoke, and actually very little late in the afternoon. Now there's a lot more. So two questions, or two-part question. One, what is burning? And two, what has caused the fires apparently to start up again?
Okay, we were never able to fully extinguish the fire in the roof structure. We were able to get it mostly knocked down, and again, because we're having extreme difficulty making access under the slate roof, it's to be expected to take a while to get there. We have had the fuel from the jet catch fire again, and we're now in there with some additional hand lines and some phone lines with aircraft firefighters inside of the insides of the Pentagon, trying to suppress it, this time with firefighting foam.
You said aircraft firefighters?
Yes, from the airport. From
the airport?
From Reagan National Airport.
Have you tell me how many bodies?
We have no information on any type of casualty or body counts at this time.
By that you mean you haven't. By that you mean you haven't removed any bodies yet.
I will not say that, okay, but that whole process is being set up and is going to take some time. So again, that's not part of this briefing.
Give us a sense that you have to get onto the roof in order to put out that fire.
Yeah, and we're up on the roof. We're up there now. We have our firefighting forces up there with great support from all the area fire departments, Washington.
Are you removing sections of the roof to get at the fire?
Yeah, we're doing what's called a trench cut, which is a slice of the roof, which then lets the fire gases out of that part of the roof. We then bring water streams into the back part of the fire cut, and so that the fire actually sucks the water up to it and helps to extinguish the fire up there. Please excuse me, I've been up all night. So, but that's basically the technique that's used. We have a couple of hundred firefighters on the fire ground right now, from all of the area fire departments.
Chief, give us a sense of the area that was destroyed, how wide it is, how many feet, and then did it break through to all 5 rings of the Pentagon?
It did not break through to all 5 rings, and I do not know the measurements.
Is there anything left of the aircraft at all?
First of all, the question about the aircraft, there are some small pieces of aircraft visible from the interior during this firefighting operation I'm talking about, but not large sections. In other words, there's no fuselage sections and that sort of thing. The other question?
Yeah, injuries among firefighters, any at all?
We've had some small, when I say small, I'm talking about not major types of injuries, but we've had, to my knowledge, we had 4 firefighters transport to area hospitals for some minor injuries, and that probably has changed since I've even been here.
They were not hurt in the collapse?
I'm sorry?
They were not hurt, and no one was hurt in the collapse?
Not to my knowledge, right. It was.
Is that the only ring that has collapsed?
That is the only ring that has collapsed, right.
The E-ring?
The very exposed ring.
Chief, there are small pieces of the plane virtually all over, out over the highway, tiny pieces. Would you say the plane exploded, virtually exploded on impact? due to the fuel or?
You know, I'd rather not comment on that. We have a lot of eyewitnesses that can give you better information about what actually happened with the aircraft as it approached, so we don't know. I don't know.
Have search and rescue teams made a priority finding the black box of the aircraft? Have you gotten to that stage of trying to locate that at this point?
We obviously will at the appropriate time, but at this particular time we're all in the preliminary stages of setting up the further operation.
Can you describe how many firemen have been involved in this, how many units, or any way that you can to give us a quantitative estimate?
Actually, believe it or not, we do not know. We had just a tremendous outpouring of help from the entire community, and we had firefighters and fire units from places that I didn't even know existed here to help with this situation. So, excuse me.
States?
Oh, yeah.
Did they come from
Several states, all over Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania.
How many search and rescue people do you have standing by?
Okay, we have 4 USAR teams. Each one of those USAR teams has a complement, and last I was briefed, there are about 60-some people in each team, so there's 4 times 60-some of the USAR teams here.
Where are they from?
4 search. The search and rescue teams are from Fairfax County, Montgomery County, from the Virginia Beach Fire Department, and from a fire department in Tennessee, and I'm sorry I don't know which fire department in Tennessee, but it's called the Tennessee Task Force, so it might be made up of several fire departments out of Tennessee.
Are more coming in, sir?
Not at this time. As you might imagine, the USAR teams are fully engaged in this situation in New York City and other places, and so we're going to try, what I've been told is they're going to try to hold it with the 4 urban search and rescue teams.
Getting search and rescue teams?
No, we have not. The team has been fabulous.
Will you be able to assure people that are working in the building that it's safe for them now to be with the smoke that's pouring
We
out
will
of the
be
building?
constantly evaluating the conditions within inside the Pentagon and working with the Pentagon staff to make sure that it is safe.
What's the special apparatus that you need?
Could you describe
the apparatus equipment? Question was, we need some very low-profile apparatus to make it into the center courtyard of the Pentagon so we can gain access to some of the roof structures. And because of some very old fire stations in some communities, they actually do design fire apparatus with very, very low profiles that has the reach capability that we need.
Sir, could you describe the extent of the damage caused by the fire now? I mean, corridors 2 through 6 are closed. Is there fire damage now throughout that, through all the rings?
So not through all the rings, but to the 2 rings on each side of the crash site, that we have some covered walkways, and we have fire going down those covered walkways. It has gone out to those covered walkways and now going down those corridors.
Flooding.
The Pentagon, obviously the question, has the military been compromised, its capabilities because of the attack? This is the nerve center of the U.S. military as the investigation into yesterday's terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington continue today with all kinds of information, leaks, little things coming here and there.
We don't know about numbers of casualties. Quite obviously, they're saying at the Pentagon up to 800, perhaps beyond. They also say as few as 10 to 50, so that information is still coming. Rescue and recovery operations going on in Washington and in New York City, and also the FBI involved trying to find out who perpetrated these mass attacks,
you
these
can imagine
hijackings.
that, I mean, across the United States and indeed in Canada, you know, security is beefed up. They're absolutely checking anything that is suspicious. And we have a few updates for you, actually, on that point. Earlier today, we reported on the fear that 2 people who were suspects had traveled from Portland to Boston, Portland, Maine to Logan Airport in Boston, and that it was possible that they had traveled across the Canadian border. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, the Canadian government, is not commenting on that, but we do have some new information based on this.
The governor of Maine says 2 hijacked suspects in the U.S. terror attacks left behind a rental car in the Portland area. He says the men apparently used New Jersey driver licenses, but little else is known about them. They found some cigarette butts
and they're going to test them for DNA, and I think that brings up a really interesting point, is what kind of security systems are in place in the United States to track if they get DNA, if they have any kind of visual, if they're going to go to the Logan Airport and check all the videotape. These are all of the things in the days and weeks ahead as the investigation continues that we'll certainly be looking for.
And ties to Osama bin Laden, who was a Saudi dissident, honed his guerrilla skills in the 1980s, commanding Arab fighters funded by the U.S. Central Intelligence
Really?
Agency. They're talking about this name. They're talking about Islamic militants, fundamentalists who may be involved in this. We're hearing reports out of Florida that they may are tracking some people there. We're hearing other reports out of New Jersey. So we're hearing things, but nothing has been officially confirmed.
That's right, and I'm sure that's going to be the case for quite some time. But a few things are clear. At Pearson Airport, Jeff Hutchison is standing by with some new information for us. Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Just off the phone with Transport Canada. And again, this country is not budging. There's been no lifting of the 12 o'clock fly restriction, so we're still waiting for that. This is in front of Terminal 3 at Pearson Airport in Toronto, and really not much happening, nobody going in. SWAT teams are here. We're in front of the Sheraton Hotel. There's a number of people who have been stranded here for quite some time. 86 planes here have to go, so it will be staggered. This is Mark Wymore. He is from St. Louis and was stranded here last night. Now you're away from home, away from your wife and family, watching this unfold on television. What did that feel like?
Oh, it was just horrible. It was like some out of a movie. You just waiting for, somebody to come on and say it's not true, but it's just the pictures and seeing the people trying to, rescue people and everything else, and then the buildings coming down. It was just horrible. The loss of life.
What do you know about you being able to get out of here? I mean, we've just said this airport might, not be open at 12, and then it's a huge backlog.
Right. With our travel agency, through our company, they're pretty much, wait and see right now. Once we hear that the airport does open up, we're supposed to contact them, and as far as getting us on a flight. So I expect, either probably late tonight or tomorrow, probably.
Okay. Well, good luck to you. Thank you, Mark. Mark Wymore from St. Louis, and he said it. Wait and see, and I think that's the case at all the airports across the country as of right now. Back to you guys.
All right, thanks, Hutch. We have much more to come. We're going to talk about how to cope with this, some trauma experts, some terrorist experts, as everyone in the world tries to grasp what happened yesterday, the unimaginable in New York City and Washington and Pennsylvania.
That's right. For a full roundup of the latest information and who's saying what, how many people are being rescued, we're going to go to Leslie Jones now in the Newsnet Center. American airports could reopen today at noon Eastern Time. Les Dorr at the U.S. Federal Aviation Authority says the official announcement is expected shortly, and the source didn't know if Washington and New York would be included. This comes after a White House statement that it believes the danger of more attacks is passing. Meantime, investigators in Florida are said to be searching the home of a man who was on board one of the planes. The man is said to be an associate of Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born militant who is the prime suspect in Tuesday's attacks. And Boston police have seized a car left by 5 Arab men who boarded a plane that was hijacked. Inside, they found flight training manuals written in Arabic, and one of the men was a trained pilot. The newspaper says authorities believe that the men had arrived in the U.S. from Canada. The U.S. Pentagon says it does not expect to find any more survivors after yesterday's terror attack. A hijacked plane plowed into the building yesterday as part of that coordinated assault. At least 80 bodies have now been recovered from the building. The plane that hit a part of the building that was undergoing renovations, and officials concede that the death toll would have been far higher if all the offices had been occupied. U.S. President George Bush will meet with Republican and Democratic leaders of Congress today. Bush and members of his cabinet plan to brief the lawmakers on the government's response to yesterday's attacks. Bush will speak about the results of the meeting at 10:45 Eastern Time. This morning, the House convened 24 hours after members fled the Capitol. The Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives plan to pass a bipartisan resolution condemning the terrorist strikes and promising retaliation. In business news today, financial markets in Canada and the United States remain closed. And in the weather today, cloudy skies in BC and Alberta, sun and cloud through the prairies, clouds with rain in Ontario, and variable skies in Quebec and eastern Canada. Our coverage of the terrorist attack on the United States will continue on Canada AM right after the break. I think one of the big concerns was after yesterday, nobody quite knew whether this was, phase one of a series of attacks, where it would go from here. And now we have some word out of the White House that they believe yesterday's attack was it, and that the risk to public safety is now diminished.
We believe that the perpetrators have executed their plan, and therefore the risks are significantly reduced. So if that's the case, the thing now is to try to rebuild, as Mayor Giuliani said in New York and in Washington, and then find out who did this, why they did this, and obviously punish them. President Bush has a press conference probably to detail more. There's been talk, Lisa, about a swift, furious strike against whoever this is, but I'm not. They have an idea that it's Osama bin Laden, but how do you get them?
Exactly. I mean, that's the big question I think everybody's looking for. They need some key evidence before they can move forward in the investigation. We will go to Washington when George W. Bush gives the update. But first, we're going to go to Christine Nielsen, who is in New Jersey, where the skyline behind you still, you know, with the smoke plumes in the air, Christine.
Yes, it's a completely changed landscape from yesterday, that's for sure. But in this neighborhood, Lisa, the church bells have been ringing on and off. These are special services for yesterday's victims. And today is obviously a very different Wednesday. Instead of Broadway matinees, people are going to church, which actually brings me to another thing, which is the good Samaritanism of the people in New York since this happened. Just half an hour ago, a man gave me his radio so that I could better find out what's happening across the river in Manhattan. To hotel owners, police, everybody is being extremely kind throughout this.
We're looking at pictures of Manhattan and what is left, and basically nothing, just ash and soot from the collapse of the two towers yesterday. You've been talking to people. Is there a sense, certainly of shock and disbelief, is there also a sense of anger of what happened yesterday?
Yes, there is, but certainly in the area that I'm spending time, which is across the river from where it happened, it's much more a sense of shock and disbelief and a real sense that people want to get back to their normal life.
Are they at work today, or are they taking Mayor Giuliani's advice and staying home, Christine?
Many people are staying home, many of them because their companies have told them to stay home, but also because the schools are closed, a lot of people are staying home to look after their children.
You look at the pictures, too, just devastation. It looks like a war zone, and you wonder when New York City, you might be able to travel the streets of New York City, how far this cleanup will go. We're looking at this could be not only days, this could be weeks.
But also the impact, I don't know, Christine, if you're hearing anything about this, but just the millions of documents, if you want to just bring it down to that, the millions of documents, employment records, financial records, that when that building collapsed and part of the debris, and there it all is on the streets of New York. I mean, there's just so many things, so many layers to this story. It must be a bit of a bizarre feeling to be standing there.
It is very bizarre. I think people haven't even thought about the documents yet, to be honest.
We're going to go to President George Bush in a moment. Christine, thank you. The Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, has issued a statement to the Canadian people, and it says, I spoke early this morning with President Bush. I reiterated directly to him the sincerest condolences of the Canadian people for the horrific attacks yesterday on innocent Americans and our offer of any security or humanitarian assistance that the United States may need. I also told him that as our closest friend and partner, America could count on our complete support and solidarity in the days to come. He asked that I let the Canadian people know how grateful he and the American people are for the assistance that Canada has provided at this terrible time. He goes on to talk about the American travelers and that we will give them safe haven and warm hospitality. And he said that during a very, very trying day, he was told of the extraordinary effort that Canadians have made. And also the last thing that Jean Chrétien has in the statement, I told him that the government of Canada, on behalf of the Canadian people, would continue to coordinate its activities to deliver the most timely and effective assistance that we can.
This, of course, comes on the heels of Colin Powell this morning, who in his statement said that the U.S. government would clamp down on anybody with borders. We're going to go to Washington. Of course, we have borders. One of the questions since early this morning was whether or not there's any relationship between the suspects and the fact that they went from Portland, Maine to Logan Airport in Boston. Did they cross the Canadian border? Rosemary Thompson, if you can give us some idea if anybody is commenting on that. Certainly in the Prime Minister's statement, he makes no reference at all to the question about whether or not any terrorists did start out in this country.
That's true. The president, or at least the prime minister, doesn't make reference to it. There is a report, however, in the Boston Herald this morning that names an unnamed source that said that there are 5 suspects that they're looking at that were at the Logan Airport in Boston. 2 of them apparently had United Arab Emirate passports. They were brothers. One of them was a pilot. 2 others apparently might have come from Canada, then went to Portland, Maine, and then on to Boston. Now, of course, this is an unnamed source. We haven't been able to get confirmation from the RCMP. I called them, actually. They're in a meeting with the commissioner right now, trying to sort out what's going on there. However, it's also interesting to note that Colin Powell was on the morning network television shows, and he didn't say Canada directly, but he did say that countries that have long borders, that have had histories of having difficulty in policing this type of thing, will be judged by the United States.
Rosemary, sorry to cut you off, just so the viewers realize it, though. We're looking at pictures now of the car that was towed from Logan, and apparently there were things found in that car that are being investigated. But you bring up a really good point. Colin Powell is not going to directly make a comment that is going to compromise Canadian-U.S. relations.
Absolutely. He doesn't want to point out Canada specifically. However, he is saying that countries on the borders of the United States will be judged on how well they deal with this type of thing. Of course, Canada has had the history of Ahmed Rassam and Mokhtar Houri, the 2 men from Montreal that were involved in the foiled attempt to bomb during the Millennium celebrations in the United States. Both of them have been convicted but not sentenced. You know, it's interesting looking at that car. Some of the contents of that car are fascinating. They say that they found flight manuals written in Arabic in that car.
Now, do you believe that? Because when I read that and some of the other things that they say they found, I thought, how could they so quickly find out information like that? So I think, I don't know, we all have to sort of be aware of the fact that unnamed sources can say whatever they want to push whatever point they want. But I agree with you. It's pretty bizarre, some of the things, Rosemary, that they say they found in the car and in the luggage at the airport.
Obviously, the FBI is grasping at any kind of information they can get right now. That's why we're getting reports from Florida, reports from New Jersey, any way to try and track these things. Also, we heard of reports earlier today of cell phone interceptions that the United States was able to hear, potentially, some people talking on their cell phones about this attack. So who knows? I mean, obviously this is going to be in the days to come that we find the real evidence that the president needs and that Colin Powell needs and that the United States needs in order to convince the world that it would be justified to take some kind of retaliatory effort.
I mean, all signs are pointing to Osama bin Laden, but, you know, all signs in Oklahoma City in 1995 pointed towards some sort of terrorist from an extremist front. And then it turned out to be an American militiaman.
Very difficult at this early stage. And Rosemary, I'm sure they're all cautioning you. We were just listening to the Pentagon news conference, and there's really very little that they seem willing to say, except that the tragic news that they believe at the Pentagon there are no more survivors in that rubble.
That's right. I mean, listening to what they had to say, it is tragic. The fire continues at the Pentagon. Apparently the jet fuel is still in between these floors and that it continues to flare up and that there are more explosions. So the fear is that because this fire has still not been extinguished, that the survivors may not be there. However, they are trying. They have microphones there, they have high-level equipment, they have cameras, they have everything, and sniffing dogs, anything to try and find people that might be inside.
And a makeshift morgue. Any indication, we keep getting differing reports about potential numbers of victims of this?
Well, they have said that it could be anywhere from 100 to 800. Now, it's been interesting talking to some of the doctors in Virginia that were treating the patients. They, of course, were ready for a large-scale effort that many, many people would come to them. In fact, very few survivors had come to them, and they were quite upset about that.
Sorry, Rosemary, the president is about to speak. We're going to take that live, and we'll speak with you when he's through.
Deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens. But we will not allow this enemy to win the war by changing our way of life or restricting our freedoms. This morning I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes to rescue victims, to help the citizens of New York City and Washington, D.C. respond to this tragedy, and to protect our national security. I want to thank the members of Congress for their unity and support. America is united. The freedom-loving nations of the world stand by our side. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail. Thank you very much.
Are you seeking a formal declaration?
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Please.
Formally,
Thank you. Thank you.
The president obviously not taking questions from reporters, with Dick Cheney on one side and Colin Powell on the other. Rosemary, you know, it's always interesting when we hear the president speak, the code language that seems to be part of these speeches. They're always short, but what is his message really, maintaining the same statement as yesterday?
Well, it's really, I think, America's resolve that it will act, that it will find these people that are responsible, that it is patient. I thought that was very interesting, that they weren't going to rush to some kind of retaliation. They would take their time, that they would get the evidence, and that the world is behind them. And that is certainly the case. In the last 24 hours, the president and Colin Powell have been on the phones with world leaders talking about this, how they might coordinate some type of attack. But America says also that it will take its time, and I think that's the bottom line here today.
Rosemary, he seems to be getting a little more angry with each press conference. He declared this an act of war.
That's right, and in fact, you know, he talks about people trying to hide and trying to have safe harbors, and that those harbors won't be safe forever. He's trying to show that whoever is behind this attack will be found eventually, and I think he has to underline that to the American people, because right now there is a lot of sadness and a lot of anger in the country, and obviously the president is feeling it as well.
Now in the studio with us, Rosemary, and feel free to jump in during this conversation. David Rudd, this should come as good news to you if Rosemary says the speech, we can interpret it as George W. Bush saying, we're not going to rush into anything here. Yes. We're going to put all of the pieces together. Right. We're going to get everybody on side before we move forward with any kind of retaliation.
Yeah, I think there's two things we need to bear in mind here. Firstly, the president offered not a lot more than he did last night, a lot of what you might call cliches. But of course, there's not much to say because the investigators are only beginning to piece everything together. He did say, make no mistake.
He says that a lot.
He says that a lot. Make no mistake, America will respond. There's a double meaning to that, I think. Firstly, it is at least a rhetorical show of resolve, but also I think it's reassuring the American people that if the United States decides to bide its time, build a case, gather more evidence, and present that evidence, that this should not be interpreted as a lack of resolve. or a lack of commitment to see the culprits caught, because there might be impatience from the public and especially from members of Congress who are going to be pushing the president to make some very, very grandiose gesture.
And they could make a mistake. They could make a mistake.
But that brings up a really good point, and I think Rosemary should jump in here. Last night we heard Senator Hillary Clinton, oh, I can't believe I almost forgot that woman's name, but anyway, Hillary Clinton commenting after the very dramatic show last night. Rosemary, if you want to tell us a little bit about that and the fact that Congress did sit today, I understand, or the Senate, and, you know, what is their message? She said last night that she and Bill Clinton, who I understand is under heavy security in Australia, fully support the actions of this government. Those were her words last night of the Bush administration.
Well, you know, let's listen to what's happened over the last 12 months. I mean, this was an election that divided America. Obviously, Republicans and Democrats had a very tough time post-election. What they're saying, the Clintons, is that they're coming alongside. They want to be on George Bush's side throughout this entire situation. And I think also Congress, there was a unity meeting today. They were talking about, you know, extra funds, this type of thing. America is not going to be left short-handed in this type of investigation, in the rescue efforts, all of the rest. 90% of Americans, apparently, according to the polls, support some type of action. Obviously, there is real national unity in the country right now because of these horrific acts.
It's a very dangerous time, though, David.
Yes.
Would you agree that, you know, you don't want that whole bandwagon concept happening? And, you know, we were talking about unnamed sources. It's very important to draw the differences between Muslim extremists and, you know, somebody's perverted concept of that religion, which is what
we've... Some fanatics.
Of course, what we're dealing with here partially is a difference in value systems. For example, some of the European officials who were looking at this yesterday called this an act by madmen. Well, to some people with certain value systems, this was not a mad act at all. It was very rational, very sane, and the people who did
well
this...
Well thought out.
Mayor Giuliani has called this a cowardly act. Well, from the point of view of the perpetrators, I mean, it takes a certain degree of courage to actually pilot that plane into a building,
to take your own life,
and to take your own life.
Like Saddam Hussein made a comment this morning or late last night that you know, you get what you
reap what you sow.
Essentially, that's what he's saying.
Yeah, quite so. In fact, I think it's going to be very interesting over the next few days to look at newspaper reports, press conferences given by other world leaders as to and assigning blame for this. Hamas, PFLP, some of the radical Islamic groups, of course, issued their typical non-denial denials, but of course want to shift the blame back to the United States in order for the United States to do something that I think Americans are not very inclined to do, and that's to take a good look in the mirror and say, listen, did our foreign policy in some way contribute to this? Again, that's not something that Americans do very often.
Well, and particularly Bush has been a very contentious president in his short time there with foreign policy. And Rosemary, if you want to give us some concept, if you can, on some of the feathers he has ruffled in his very short time there. But again, you know, this is not something they just came up with a few weeks ago.
Well, that's right. I mean, we've seen in the last few weeks there were obviously some upset at Durban in South Africa at the racism conference that the United States didn't get involved there, that they decided not to participate because they felt that Israel was being isolated and being singled out as a racist country. Colin Powell decided not to go. A lower level delegation went. However, one would, in the United States, that's really almost like water under the bridge at this point. I mean, what's happened in the last 24 hours has shaken this country to its core. And in many ways, the feeling on the street today is one of unity, one that we have to stand by the president.